We're live. How's everyone doing out there? Let me move the mic a little closer here. All right, welcome everybody to another live stream, another Duran live stream. It's been a while since we've done a live, a couple of weeks. We took a little bit of I don't want to say a break, but we needed to get some stuff done. I had a bit of a computer meltdown, but now we are back. I've got my computer back and we are here to do a really, really good live, an important live. So how is everyone doing today on this Friday? We hope everyone is doing well. I am still in lockdown. I think we've been in lockdown, Alexander, for now 3 months. 3 months we've been in lockdown. How about you guys in the UK?
I think it's a bit longer, actually. And by the way, we've just had figures about the British economy, a 10% contraction in 2020, the worst for over 300 years. So just think of that. I mean, so it's hard times here, hard times in every respect.
All right, great. So let's see where people are joining us from. It is hard times, Alexander. It is hard times, but we'll get through it somehow, some way. We'll have a little bit of fun with this topic as well. And let's see where people are joining us from. Is Spartan Warrior Queen here? Someone is saying that she's here. So if you are in the chat, Spartan Warrior Queen moderating, good to have you here. Let's see, we got hello from Scotland, from Canada, from Ireland, from 11 months in California lockdown. Wow. That's crazy. Yeah. Privyet iz Rossiya. Privyet Anatoly, how are you? Wales here. Let's see, Sussex, England, Warsaw. Awesome. How's everybody doing in Warsaw? France. Where else? Manchester, England. Mardi Gras, New Orleans. I love Mardi Gras. Love New Orleans. Great city. Atlanta, Georgia, Texas, Odessa, Texas, Denmark. Norway was having some people out in the streets the other day. Alexander?
Oh, yes, absolutely. There have been protests in Norway. There have been lots of protests in Berlin, obviously in Germany, they often are, and in the Netherlands. The Netherlands is unusual. They're not usually quite so fiery. And of course, Denmark. So there's been protests in many places now. And not so much, I would say, in London, actually. Here, things have been quieter. But, it may be that with the rollout, I have to avoid the word, but we all know what we mean. It may be that people have hope that it's all ending, and that's preventing people from coming out and protesting.
Yeah. The Netherlands is heating up.
Yeah,
heating up. Keep your eye on the Netherlands. Yeah. They got elections coming up in March, don't they?
Yes, absolutely. Very soon.
Big story, big news coming out of the Netherlands. Hello once again to everybody in Ireland, in Canada, in Quebec, in Australia. How's everybody doing in Australia? Let's see, New Zealand, where else? Massachusetts, USA. Good to have you here in Massachusetts, in London, in Albuquerque, in Serbia. All right. Let's jump into this topic, Alexander, because there is a lot that we need to discuss. How is everybody doing in Singapore? Happy and healthy Chinese New Year. Good to have you here in Singapore, in Italia as well, and Malaysia. Alexander, the title of the live stream is Clown World versus Real World. What are your first thoughts when I say those words, Alexander? Then I'll get into the open of this live stream. What are the first things that pop into your head when I put Clown World, Real World, and I put a photo of Biden on one side and on the other side a picture of Putin?
Well, I have to say two things. Firstly, the moment you mentioned clown world, I can't help but think about this impeachment that's rolling out in the United States at the moment. We will no doubt discuss this, but suffice to say that it is the weirdest, most bizarre, most strange trial I have ever seen in my life. The second is, since you bring up the topic of Putin, I can't help but think also of this extraordinary visit by Europe's External Affairs High Representative Commissioner, call him what you like, Josep Borrell, to Moscow, where he had this extraordinary meeting with Lavrov. We're now starting to get more information about that. Lavrov has given a long interview for a Russian YouTube channel, actually. And we're starting to get all kinds of information, and we're starting to see many of the things that he said. And suffice to say, that brought a serious and very real person, Sergei Lavrov, one of the most experienced diplomats in the world, against someone who, well, if not perhaps exactly a clown, at least not in his estimation, comes very close in terms of diplomacy to being one. It's becoming increasingly clear how hopelessly and completely out of his depth Borrell was, and how little understanding he had of international diplomacy at that sort of level. Then, of course, we have all the events in the European Union with all the criticisms and railing about, well, we know what's going on. We've done programs on Ursula von der Leyen, rather, I should say, and all that sort of thing, and the way they've been making even Boris Johnson look good and efficient and competent at the moment, which is quite an achievement, I have to say. So lots going on. And then we've had this very strange exchange between Emmanuel Macron, now criticizing not the United States, but some people implicitly in the United States about criticisms they've been making of French government policies in relation to Islamist threats and Islamist terrorism. And of course, he's clearly referring to articles which have appeared in certain US newspapers. So we have all this going on in the world, and at the same time, real things are indeed happening. I mean, there have been important events going on around the world. We see more changes in the economic balance. We see deepening recessions across the West, at least deepening recessions in Britain. I said that the economy here has contracted by 10% in 2020. We see a sign of growing dysfunction in our governments, and we see how instead of their governments dealing with these very serious, very real problems, they put on circus displays like the one we're seeing in Congress at the moment and in all sorts of other places. So that's a quick, brief summary, a brief statement of views. But, perhaps the impeachment trial, because it's close to the kind of things I used to do. It's the sort of thing that I've attended lots of trials in my time. That is the thing which for me stands out as being the most bizarre and eccentric and extraordinary of all.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Guys, hit that like. Do me a favor and hit that like as you enter the building. That really helps us out a lot. And look for us on Rumble, on BitChute, and on Odyssey as well. We are broadcasting all the time there. Look for Alexander's channel. It is on YouTube. It is on BitChute. It is also on Odyssey. It's coming soon on Rumble. Look for my channel on YouTube, BitChute, Odyssey, and Rumble. Alexander, let's see. When Trump was, what's the word I want to use, replaced? Let's use that word. When he was replaced by Biden, it seems that the West lost their last real leader. And I really mean that. It really does seem like the West lost their last real leader. I mean, a larger than life figure that cared about the country, cared about the sovereignty of the country. And Trump kept the US tethered to reality. Let me say that. He really did keep the US tethered to reality. And he really did speak plainly. He spoke in a real tone, and he kept the U.S. He made the people that wanted to live in fantasy world crazy, but he kept everyone else grounded. This is just my opinion, but that's how I saw Trump as a leader and what Trump represented. And now that Trump has been replaced, it seems like the U.S. and the West is now untethered, and they're moving ever greater, ever faster into a world of fantasy, into a clown world. There is no doubt about it. And you mentioned some of the things that represent this move towards a clown world, towards a fantasy world, and it's a dangerous fantasy world at that. This is not a fun fantasy world we're moving into. It's a very dangerous place that the West is moving into. You mentioned the impeachment, and you may want to elaborate on the impeachment, which really is theater. I mean, this is true theater. It is a play taking place in front of all of us. It's meant to distract from many important things that are happening in the world and many things that the U.S. deep state, the U.S. government, the Democrats, the oligarchs are up to. But, we're seeing this play. We're being forced to watch this play. You're looking on cancel culture in overdrive. And one example is what happened yesterday to Gina Carano, who was deplatformed because of what she said on a post, by Disney. Out of all the companies, Disney is lecturing us about morality. You have what happened there. You have Project Veritas has been deplatformed. You have the Gateway Pundit has been deplatformed. I mean, this week has been a terrible week as far as big tech clamping down on conservative or libertarian voices. You have big tech censorship in overdrive. You mentioned Borrell in Moscow. You mentioned AstraZeneca. You mentioned a von der Leyen who's living in absolute fantasy world. We did a video on her fake apology. We had Joe Biden on the phone with Xi Jinping of China, and you had two very different narratives play out as to what was said. Biden's narrative, once again, focuses on the fantasy and on the feelings. And you look at Xi and China's narrative, which is just focusing on business and getting stuff done. You have leaders in fantasy world, Alexander: Biden, Merkel, van der Leyen, Trudeau, Rutte, Draghi now. Draghi is leading Italy now. And then you have on the other side of the aisle, and once again, I'm not saying good or bad here. You may like these leaders, you may not. On the other side, you have leaders like Putin, like Xi, like Erdogan, like Netanyahu, like Bolsonaro. And you also could throw in Orban, even though he's in the EU, you could put Orban on that side of real leaders. In the middle now, you seem to have this Macron, who's this globalist figure who is now saying, maybe this woke ideology is not good for me, not good for my country, and will definitely not get me reelected. And he's starting to actually make public statements saying that France cannot survive neoliberal, woke, cancel culture ideology. He actually said that. He said it's going to tear us apart. It's going to tear France apart. Alexander, what do you want to start with from everything that I have said? Clown world versus real world. Want to start with impeachment, Macron, Borrell? What are the topics that you think are important? What are the fantasy topics? What are the real world topics that we should be taking a look at?
Right. Let me first of all make two quick observations on what you said. Where any system based on unreality is by definition dangerous, because obviously you're not dealing with the real problems, you're dealing with fantasy problems, and always the temptation in that kind of situation is to try to make the fantasy problems real by taking steps that might make them real. So, you start saying, for example, that Russia interfered in your elections or whatever, and that you need to respond to that. So you do respond to something that hasn't actually happened, or at least not in the way that you say it has. And that can cause a whole set of reactions and further reactions and more consequences. And we see this, by the way, coming out of some statements that have been made from Moscow over the last few days, which I will come to. But the other thing that you make an absolutely correct point is that the other side, if I can call them that, the leaders on the other side, people like Putin and Xi Jinping, are very grounded and very serious people. They're very purposeful people. Now, again, you may like them, you may dislike them, you may approve of what they do, you may disapprove of what they do, but you only have to see what they say and how they interact with their officials to see that these are purposeful and realistic people who have long-term plans. And of course, the thing that is really changing the weather internationally is that these two leaders are bringing their two countries ever closer to each other. And that's perhaps the most disturbing thing of all, if you're looking at the international situation. And we will talk about that also. Now, on the subject of Macron, in my opinion, is fundamentally, intrinsically, and entirely a person of the Biden, Merkel, Trudeau school of politics. The reason he is making all of these comments that he's making now is because he knows perfectly well that these policies, these attitudes that you're talking about, are deeply unpopular in France. France is a country with a strong patriotic tradition, strong republican tradition, strong democratic tradition, but also a very, very powerful tradition based on, if you like, French thinking and French thought, of tolerance, of freedom of expression, and of logic and of reason. After all, they actually created a religion based on reason, and which briefly, so the French find all of these things. I'm talking about the French. A lot of the French people find a lot of these things that we are seeing increasingly unpopular, both because they don't like the way they see France being submerged in these globalist integrationist institutions that we've talked about many times, and they can see through very clearly the unreality of many of these things, and they are starting to push back. And Macron is becoming worried that his electoral position in France ahead of presidential elections next year is starting to erode away. So that's, I think, why Macron is talking as he is. He is not leading France. He is being led in that direction by opinion in France. If he is re-elected president next year and has a second term, he will go back to being exactly like Trudeau, Biden, and all the rest. So that's what I wanted to say. I will speak first about the impeachment. Now, we had a ludicrous first day with Donald Trump's lawyers behaving like, again, no lawyers I've ever seen. I mean, they made no attempt to even argue the constitutional points, which are critical and critically important in any coherent way. We saw the House impeachment managers putting together deeply manipulative movies, a deeply manipulative movie, which really had no bearing at all on the constitutional issues, and presenting a whole set of extremely flawed, and I say flawed, I mean appallingly bad arguments in support of their position. So as a result, we have a trial which is not a trial, involving an impeachment of a private citizen who is not in office, a complete constitutional horror. And then we've had 2 days of the House impeachment managers purportedly presenting evidence, but they have not actually presented any evidence whatsoever that is remotely pertinent to the article of impeachment that they are bringing their claim about. They have done nothing to prove that Donald Trump intended, through his words, to incite anybody to do any of the things that they allege of him. They've actually, again, instead of addressing those questions, those absolutely critical questions, which are based on their own article of impeachment, provided more movies, which of course are not, properly speaking, evidence. The one thing, of course, which they have not done is produced any witnesses to substantiate, or who would substantiate, any of the essential claims that they are making. And in fact, the actual events which took place in Washington, D.C. on the 6th of January have been and continue to be appallingly under-investigated. We still don't really know what actually went on, but it is increasingly looking to me, and I'm drawing entirely from media reports, not from actual evidence by anybody. And I would point out the House managers are doing the same. They're basing many of their claims on media reports, which are not perhaps really correct. But media reports I'm seeing is that the real problem in getting the National Guard deployed to Washington, both before the protests and during the protests, was the fact that the government of DC, the local government, was resistant to that idea because it had been opposed to National Guard deployments previously in relation to other events which had happened in places like Lafayette Park. So that's how it is starting to look to me. At the same time as we have this bizarre and peculiar impeachment, which isn't an impeachment taking place, we have other, ludicrous things like a Swalwell changing the text of tweets, citing a tweet by somebody who doesn't even have a Twitter account, and this ludicrous incident of Andrea Mitchell thinking that a famous quote that every English schoolboy and schoolgirl knows comes from Shakespeare is not really but from Shakespeare at all, but comes from Faulkner, and with the Washington Post piling in support of her, even as she gets all of that wrong. I mean, the whole thing is preposterous beyond words. And if I was an American, and certainly if I was an American senator, having to sit through and listen to all of that, I would feel ashamed for the United States.
Very unimpressive people. I mean, you watch them, you try to watch the impeachment because it's very, very hard to watch the thing. But all you realize is that these people are just not impressive. How the hell did they get into office? And, when I think about what happened on January 6th, you make a really interesting point, and everything I read about it, it gets me thinking to the tactics and the techniques that the United States has used abroad. And it reminds me of stuff that they would do in Syria with Assad Must Go, or any other type of, for lack of a better word, false flags, where something goes down in Syria or in Iraq or somewhere, and literally within an hour or two, all the media is on it. It's amplified on social media, and the U.S. government is already making a definitive statement. Like MH17 comes to mind as well. Many tragedies, or many instances, some real, some not real, that happened, some staged. It's like within a few hours, the narrative has already been set, almost as if it was pre-planned, the narrative, and they amplify it. And that's exactly what's happening right now before our eyes, but it's happening inside the United States. And there's never an investigation or a proper investigation. And once again, you can look at Syria, you can look at MH17, you can look at so many instances that have happened in the past 10 years, where by the time you actually get to some sort of investigation and some sort of truth, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years have passed. And then eventually you get to some sort of truth. But by that point in time, it's, some war has started or something terrible has already taken effect, and it's game over. This is exactly the same thing, but it's been re-imported home into the U.S. Everything they've done outside the U.S. has now just been reintroduced into the U.S.
Absolutely, that is exactly right. I mean, you have an event take place. Immediately, there is a rush to not just condemn, but to point fingers at people who they say is the guilty party. There's been no investigation at this point, and anybody who says, let's take a step back, let's investigate, let's find out what really happened, let's not rush to conclusions. Anybody who does that is howled down. I mean, they're accused of naivety, treason, collusion with the other side, being apologists, you name it. And then, of course, eventually, many years later, quite often, we find that the truth is quite different from the one that we were led to think. But not only has it been imported into the United States, it has been imported in such a way, in this case, as to create a scene for an impeachment, which is itself unconstitutional. And by the way, you point in what you said to the actual problem, because I said that the House impeachment managers have not provided a factual case. The reason they can't provide a factual case, the reason they need to indulge in all this emotive, manipulative behavior with all these films and shows and all of this, is precisely because there is no investigation taken place. So they are winging it through what they insist on calling a trial. But this is a trial without any evidence, because nobody has actually made an effort to go out there and sift through the evidence. What would normally happen in a case of this kind, what ought to be happening in a case of this kind, is there ought to be a full investigation. Somebody ought to be appointed to take charge of it. The congressional committees ought to be looking at it. We ought to be getting witnesses. Witnesses should be coming forward to Congress also, giving evidence on oath in public. We could go through this over months, find out perhaps in 3-6 months' time, shouldn't take much longer, what did actually take place, who was at fault, who was not at fault, what actions did Trump take, what actions did the mayor of Washington, D.C. take, what actions were taken by the Pentagon, what actions were taken by the Capitol Hill police, what Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and all those people were up to, what the sergeants at arms in the Congress building were up to, all of this large number of people, what they were doing and how this breakdown in security, because that's, in my opinion, what ultimately this was. This breakdown in security took place. Then you allocate responsibility. And then once you have allocated responsibility on the basis of the facts, you are in a position to start taking some sort of action. That might be through bringing a criminal case, or it might be through civil actions for negligence, or it might be some other things. It cannot be through impeachment, because Donald Trump, to say this again, is a private citizen, and you do not impeach private individuals, not just in the United States, but in any country. That is a completely misconceived approach. But the reason we are seeing this impeachment happen now, in my opinion, is clearly intended to lock in this narrative about the events on the 6th of January and make it appear as if it's been proven, when in fact there is so much about those events which we still don't know.
I understand that, and I agree with you. They want to lock in the narrative. They want to prevent Trump from being a viable candidate in 2024. Maybe he hasn't said anything. To be fair to Trump and his team, we've had a lot of hints about what might happen, but Trump hasn't come out publicly and made his position clear at all. He's actually been very quiet, and he hasn't been seen. Of course, you could say that it's because big tech has deplatformed him and has tried to vanish him. But if he wanted to be heard and seen, he would be heard and seen. So, I think that Trump is deliberately just laying low while all of this is happening. And maybe he is planning and plotting his next move. We don't know. We really don't know. But there's no doubt he is a private citizen, and you cannot impeach a private citizen. But we're not talking about a country that is tethered to reality anymore. Yeah. The United States is completely run by people who live in a fantasy world. And it's a country that's being pushed into fantasy land. Now we've done.
Can I just say what they do is they create narratives. Those narratives may be entirely fictional. They may be completely fictitious, as we are now seeing. But then they try and impose those narratives, these fictitious narratives, and insist that we all accept them as truth. And that is the point where we lose touch with reality. And that's what's going on now.
That's the difference. Is in the past, when they were running these fictitious narratives, and I'll just take, let's take the case of Syria, for example, because we've done many videos on Syria and many of the false flag attacks that took place. And we analyzed things very carefully. And we always came to the same conclusion, that what is being reported is a complete hoax. I mean, you have a CNN reporter sniffing a bag, a knapsack, which supposedly is doused with dangerous chemicals, and she's sniffing it going, oh my God, this smells funny. I mean, just ridiculous, comical stuff like that. But, we've looked at these narratives and we've said, okay, this is ridiculous. And, the worst that we've had happen to us is maybe the video where we did that analysis was demonetized, that specific video, or put in limited monetization. Now, they've taken it a complete step further, where that if you disagree with the narrative, you're going to be demonetized. You're going to be deplatformed. You're not going to be able to bank. You're not going to be able to find insurance. You're not going to be able to find a home, buy a home, rent an apartment. I mean, they've taken it to a completely new level. That's why this is getting so damn dangerous. Is for the first time we're seeing that they are actually putting all those tools that they've been investing in for so long, academia, big tech, government institutions, and they're actually putting them to work in order to make sure that you believe the fantasy. And Joe Biden is even signing executive orders that reinforce the fantasy. I mean, they're putting everything into this unreal world. It's not reality. Meanwhile, you have an entire other part of the planet which is just doing business. They're just going about their daily lives, and the leaders are doing the daily things that they need to do to take their country step by step to a better position. And this is where the wheels are going to start falling off in the West, and where the people that are the leaders that are not in the West or that are out of the system are just looking on and just saying, this is just too easy. This competition is just too easy.
Yes. I mean, that's absolutely right. I mean, you only have to look at what. Let's just pick one leader, because it's the one that's most accessible in some ways to follow what he's doing, because he keeps a very detailed website, and that's Vladimir Putin. He's had meetings with his science people. He's had meetings with his government people reviewing economic policy. He's just had another meeting. This is all, within the last couple of days. He's meetings with the senior judges in the various courts to talk about how to refine and smooth out problems in the justice system. He's had more discussions with his security people. There have been 2 meetings of the Security Council, and we've had discussions about various topics there. We've had a big discussion about setting up, making up the ground that Russia has to make in developing supercomputers and such things. These are practical things. These are actually real things. They've also talked about wages. He had a very interesting thing to say about public sector wages. He was complaining that public sector wages are being misreported in the statistics, because people who are entitled to higher wages are being put on short-time work. So it seems that there is overall people across the public service in Russia are in fact being paid the full wage, whereas in fact half of them are being put on part-time work, so they're being paid less than they should be paid for the actual work they do. He had a whole discussion about this, and this was, accepted and understood to be a problem. These are real things. These are actual real problems that confront people. This is completely unlike what we see in the West today. And I am sure if you had, you were able to get an insight into what goes on in Beijing, in the grounds of the Communist Party's headquarters in Zhongnanhai, you would find that Xi Jinping also has very, very practical and focused discussions with his officials too. I repeat the point you made before. You may not like these leaders. You may find many of the things they do very disturbing. And certainly in the case of China, well, we've talked about the kind of thing the Chinese government does, and the fact that it is far from being a liberal democracy or country where free speech free speech happens. But the fact is that they are practical and they're forging ahead. And they are indeed forging ahead. Putin made the point, for example, that his country is the only country in the world that has developed 3 medications to address the problems of the current pandemic. You may have every sort of view about the merits of that. I'm not going to get into this. I am not a doctor or scientist, as I repeatedly say. But the fact of the matter is, he has done this. The European Union has not. And there's the difference. Ursula von der Leyen is unable to do the kind of things that Vladimir Putin is able to do, because he is a realistic leader of a functional government, and she is not a realistic person of an entity that has many of the trappings of a government, but isn't actually even a government at all.
Yeah, absolutely, not at all a government, but it's all the bad and none of the good of a government. But I mean, we've seen, since you're talking about the European Union, let's talk about the European Union and some of the reality checks that they've gotten.
Yeah.
They got a big dose of reality with the AstraZeneca debacle and the rollout debacle. They made fun of Sputnik V, Sputnik 5, whatever you want to call it. But, now they're groveling to Russia in order to get some sort of help. Yeah. Meanwhile, countries that did work with Russia, say Israel comes to mind, for example, are doing fine. I mean, they're once again, they're forging forward.
Yes.
You look at Borrell, and when he went to meet with Lavrov, he got a painful dose of reality, dose of reality. Once again, a man that lives in La La Land, goes to Russia and just gets completely smacked down by Lavrov.
Absolutely. I mean, as I said, we're starting to get detailed accounts from the Russians of what was actually said. And I had wondered, because, of course, Borrell is a Spanish socialist politician, but he's actually ethnically a Catalan. And, of course, he went to discuss Navalny there. And I had wondered, and in fact, I discussed this on my own videos, whether the Russians would bring up Catalonia, and it turns out they did. I just get a quote. This is from an interview Lavrov has given, in which he's described his discussions. I notified Borrell that if he presents this matter, that's to say Navalny, from this angle during a news conference, I will respond by mentioning the Catalans sentenced to 12 years or more in prison for organizing the referendum on Catalonia's independence. We were accused of organizing this referendum, but no one presented a single piece of evidence, nothing even remotely close to the facts. So it happened. In other words, he did bring up Catalonia. He brought up all sorts of other things. And unfortunately, Russian translation services are painfully slow. But what we're beginning to get out of Russia about what Lavrov and Borrell said to each other makes it absolutely obvious and clear why Borrell left Moscow with his tail between his legs.
Yeah, and I'm going to get to Navalny as well. As far as, I think Navalny is a really good example of living in the real world and living in fantasy land. The European Union and Germany, they've gotten a dose of reality with Nord Stream 2, as has the United States with Nord Stream 2, because no matter how much they would like it to go away, it's not going away. And you could talk about that as well. And then in the beginning of the live stream, you mentioned the UK economy.
Yes.
We've got a lot of sobering news about the U.S. economy. Some states which avoided or managed the lockdowns well will be all right, but most of the U.S. is going to be hurting. And much of the executive orders that Biden is looking to pass or has passed are not going to help the situation at all. They're about to pump trillions of dollars into the economy. And of course, I believe that Europe, you're going to see much of the same. A lot of the leaders in the smaller countries in Europe, and I reside in one of those small countries, they don't really talk much about the economy, and they're just solely focused on keeping everything completely shut down. But sooner or later, they are going to come in front of the TV cameras and they are going to say, you know what, everybody, we've got big problems. Here comes austerity. Once again, they live in a fantasy world and they avoid the reality, but sooner or later, the reality is going to come, and it's going to not only hit them, it's going to hit all of us. But the countries that manage things well and manage things with prudence and with leadership are the countries that you're not seeing these problems.
Yes, indeed. Well, this is exactly right, because, of course, they're not seeing these problems. And I'm glad you brought up economic policy, because, of course, we perhaps ought to talk about economic policy, because what Biden is doing in the United States, and you're absolutely right, it's going to be copied in Europe also eventually, is that he is doing what Barack Obama wants him to do. What Barack Obama thought he should have done in 2008, but was too scared to do. He's now that Obama isn't actually president, he's getting Biden to do it instead, which is open the floodgates of money. We're looking at a tidal wave of money flowing through the United States. We have increases in money supply of around 25% since 2019. This, by the way, whilst output is depressed and whilst manufacturing in the United States is very disorganized, we are going to have a wall of money moving towards the United States. We're already seeing the effect this is having on the dollar, and we're already seeing growing signs across the world of inflationary pressures building. Food prices around the world are rising. Oil prices have been edging up. All of this is a clear indicator that inflation is going to grow. And there are some people, and I'm not referring here to Larry Summers, who, by the way, I can't stand, even though he says this, but sometimes even Larry Summers gets it right. But other people, trained economists, people I've talked to, they say the same thing. They expect inflation in the United States to be very much higher before long. And what does the Federal Reserve Board do in response to this? Well, Jerome Powell has now come forward and says that monetary policy will continue to remain basically as it is. In other words, still more credit creation, still more money creation. What you are doing, pouring all of this money into an economy that is already showing some indicators of overheating, it is going to overheat an awful lot more. And of course, if we start getting inflation, that's going to hammer the middle classes and indeed the working class people. And of course, it's going to again accelerate the drift towards ever greater concentration of wealth in ever smaller numbers of people. Now, you made a number of comments about Donald Trump at the beginning of this program. One of the things I've been doing actually recently, there's been a number of interesting articles that have been appearing, which have looked carefully now at the effect of his tax changes in the United States, which he carried out shortly after he became president, and which was his signature economic policy. And one of the things that's now becoming increasingly clear is that the effect of those tax changes is that they actually raised disposable income for middle and lower class Americans. The effect of those tax changes, contrary to everything you may have read in the Washington Post, the New York Times, on CNN, on MSNBC, contrary to everything that's been said there, the effect of those tax changes was progressive. It actually caused people in the middle and lower ends of the economic spectrum, the parts of the people who are actually the wealth creators ultimately in the United States. These are the people who create most of the wealth of the United States. They saw their living standards grow, and of course the oligarchs, as the actual greater burden of that tax, in fact, fell upon them. In some individual states across the Union, California being one, raises in local state taxes to some extent negated the effect of what Donald Trump's overall tax had done. Now, this was, as I said, a progressive tax. It was actually successful. We saw the United States economy grow. Biden is moving to reverse it. So he is pumping out money. He's distorting the tax system. Jerome Powell is going to increase more money spending. We're looking at a real possibility of higher inflation. This is not going to end well.
Yeah, I mean, people talk about the Great Reset, and you get a lot of articles, and they say it's going to happen or it's happening right now. I mean, it is really happening right now, in that you are seeing a select few few extremely wealthy people. I mean, wealth beyond anyone's imagination.
Yes.
And they are just, they're gobbling up everything. I mean, they're taking over. And Biden is completely playing into their hands.
Yes.
I mean, the Biden administration is the administration of the oligarchs. And it drives me completely crazy when I hear, liberal or progressive voices shout about Trump and what Trump did. You said it perfectly, Alexander. Trump was more progressive than Obama ever could have been or ever would have dreamed to be.
Absolutely.
And Trump did more things for the middle class than Clinton and Obama combined. And Biden is doing everything to enrich the oligarch class. And you're going to see the same thing happening in the UK and happening in Europe. The same exact thing. I have no doubt about it, that whatever is happening in the US is just going to carry over to the UK and to the EU. You may want to talk about what's going on with the EU and the UK economy as well. But what do you think of what I've said?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the difference is, you see, Donald Trump, his approach to the economy was through tax changes, which affected people at the bottom. Biden and indeed Jerome Powell and all these peoples and Obama's, because this is in a way a continuation of what Obama was doing. As I said, much more than what he had wanted to do, what he is ashamed that he didn't have the courage to do. Now that he's no longer responsible and accountable, he's getting Biden and the people around him to do it. What they're going to do is that they're going to increase spending instead. So where taxes helped people, as we now know, this is granular studies of the tax changes, helped people of the middle and lower classes. This enormous spending we have seen repeatedly. What happens to it? All this huge flow of money, it flows to the top. It makes the billionaires richer still. Some of them are already not just billionaires, they are 100 billionaires, people like Bloomberg and people like that. And this is going to make them trillionaires before very long. I mean, that is the logic of these sort of policies. And of course, if it does lead to higher inflation, you're going to see those imbalances increase even further. And of course, the pressures in Europe are going to be doing exactly the same thing. So you're going to see already the European Central Bank. It started with Draghi. It's now increasing under Christine Lagarde. That they're QE all over the place, buying bonds. We've now actually seen Italian bond prices fall to their lowest rate ever. This is even as Italy's debt burden has increased to 160% of GDP. I mean, unbelievable, but it's now the lowest ever because they know that the European Central Bank will just continue to hoover that all up, which means that people can just buy bonds and the Italian state can just go on issuing bonds, and it just goes round and round and creating a kind of magic money tree. But ultimately, who pays? Because someone ultimately always has to pay to keep this thing going, because you can only create money when there are taxes being collected at the same time, because without the taxes, there is no confidence in the money. There is no real sense that these debts, which is what they are, will ever be repaid. Who is going to pay the taxes that make all this possible? Again, it's going to be middle-class people. And there's going to be middle-class people in Italy and Spain and Greece and France. And of course, it's also going to be middle-class people in Germany. And if we see higher inflation in Germany at a time when people in Germany are already complaining, as I have seen for myself, about negative interest rates, if they have inflation, that's going to hurt savings in Germany even more and damage people's living standards and their whole conception of frugality and saving and building and investing, which is how Germany was built into the great economic power that it is now. So we're seeing all of these things happening, and they're not really being discussed. They're not really being talked about. If you bring up the subject, you get called a populist, and you, as I said, risk all these things happening to you, which we see. If we go just to continue on this, if we talk about Viktor Orban. I know Viktor Orban says many things people don't like, don't agree with. The reality, the reason for this animus against Orban is that he went against this style of economic policy. Hungary is not in the euro. It conducts its economic policies in a radically different way. And of course, it acted against these footloose oligarchs who are the overall and extreme beneficiaries of the system.
That's the key. Don't be in the euro. That is the key. And that is why Orban is succeeding, where all the other countries in Europe that are tethered to the euro, that are using the euro, are completely falling apart. The UK was never in the euro. They're out of the EU. Alexander, what do you see going on in the UK? You mentioned their economy is performing pretty bad right now. What do you see going on? Is the UK going to make it out of this? How do you see Johnson navigating this?
The great problem with Johnson, as we've discussed many times, is that he's a very skilled, very clever politician. Nobody would call him a good manager. As I said, it is quite an achievement for Ursula von der Leyen to come across, to be exposed as an even worse manager than Boris Johnson is. And I don't know to what extent he really understands these forces that are at play. He also has a finance minister, we call him in Britain the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, who in my opinion is very, very much a part of the global financial elite. He actually belongs to this. I mean, he comes from a billionaire background. And I think that he will be extremely resistant to any steps or changes in Britain to its economic structure here, which might, transgress the interests of these sort of people. But consider, Britain did organise its testing programs. I understand the skepticism people have. I'm not going to get into that discussion. It did organise its testing programs far more efficiently in the end, after a lot of muddle and disorganization along the way. But in the end, it got there, and it's testing far more people than any European Union country is. It did, in the end, get its medications in order. It has options and alternatives outside the EU, which it would not have had if it had remained in. The question is whether it will use them. And I will say this about Britain. Of course, I've lived here for many, many years. Britain, a bit like the United States, is a country which does have tremendous entrepreneurial flair. If the British government understands that and knows how to use that properly and well, then we will come through. But if, on the other hand, we go down the same route as everybody else is, as we see in Biden's America and in Ursula von der Leyen's and Angela Merkel's, EU, then, I mean, we will be in as bad a mess as they are. And perhaps, because we're obviously a smaller country, even worse.
All right, let's do some super chats, and we'll continue the conversation. Let's knock out some super chats here, guys. What do you think about doing a call-in show? Let me know in the chat what you guys think if we put a call-in show to add to our videos and our live streams. Just let me know in the chat if you think that's a good idea. Alexander from Raul Pinto, a $10 super chat. As the U.S. collapses, do you think Russia will take the lead as the world's super cop?
No, I think the Russians find the whole idea of being a super cop completely, against their whole ideology and way of thinking. I mean, you often hear them say, that the Soviet Union, interfered and got itself involved in many affairs around the world, and it didn't do it any good at all, and they're not going to go there either. So no, they're not going to be a super cop. What the Russians want to see is a functioning international system based on sovereign states, which enter into proper, equal obligations with each other that they stick and abide by and don't interfere in the internal affairs of each other. That's what they want to see. And they believe that such a system will be more stable and more peaceful than one in which one particular country appoints itself the super cop and goes around and attacks lots of other countries and changes governments and interferes in internal affairs and does that sort of thing. They have a realistic foreign policy, a realist foreign policy, and it is based on a realistic assessment of their own power. They understand that their power has limits. The problem in Washington is that there are many people there who don't accept that US power has any limits.
Alexander, I want to ask you, where do you see, and I forgot to ask you this in the other segments, where do you see India and Modi in all of this? Because Modi had a very good relationship with Trump. He's a strong leader. There's no doubt about it. Once again, whether you agree with him or not is a different issue. But he is a strong leader for India.
Yes,
and India is a rising. It is a power, but it is a rising power as well. Where do you see Modi in this world order at the moment?
Yes, right. I mean, let's talk about the immediate term. I think there is going to be a cooling in relations between India and the US because I think Modi and Biden, Modi and the Democratic Party are fundamentally at odds on many things. So where Modi got on well with Donald Trump, I simply don't see the same kind of warmth in relations between Modi and the United States now. And at the same time, I have to say, I've never been a person who thinks that India is going to commit itself to long-term alliances with any particular power. It is in a very strong position. It sees a Eurasian bloc, let's call it that, China, Russia, all those countries, they're emerging. It sees the Atlantic bloc as well. It's positioned between the two. It's able sometimes to tilt towards the one, sometimes to tilt towards the other. It's very, very friendly with relations with Russia and it's buying a lot of useful and interesting technology from the Russians. It's buying more fighter jets, MiG-29 fighter jets. It's obtained Russian expertise to build itself nuclear ballistic missile submarines. It leverages its strong relationship with Russia to try to some extent to counter its problems with China. And at the same time, it is also maintains a dialogue with China. There's been a disengagement between China and India, by the way, over the last few days. They've each withdrawn troops from the border. And it will also want to maintain good relations with the West. So it's very well positioned to get the best from everybody, not so much, I think, by playing off everybody against each other, but by keeping doors open and maintaining an active dialogue. And as somebody from a diplomatic family, you will know that India actually has a very capable diplomatic service. There are many problems within India itself. It's still in many ways a very poor and underdeveloped country. Its industrial base is still not as large or as advanced as a country of India's size would require. Its transport systems are still in many ways creaking. It is advancing. I am sure, given time, it will become an important power in the world. And of course, it isn't already an important power, but I'm sure it will become an even more important power. And the Indians are in that fortunate position where nobody is really their enemy and they can just bide their time and sort out their problems step by step. And that's what I think they're doing.
All right. From Robert, 1999, Super Chat, keep up the good work. Ever since I was red-pilled 5 years ago, I rely on alternative media like you guys. Since I cannot force myself to watch the mainstream media, it's tough. It's tough watching the mainstream media. That's for damn sure. Thank you very much for that Super Chat, Robert.
It's becoming very difficult and it's becoming actually, frankly, upsetting. I mean, there's only so much I find I can take anymore. to be honest. I mean, so much of what I see when I go onto mainstream media is just people basically shouting, absolute flat out lies, and people shouting, in effect. I mean, it's a sort of ranting at you all the time. And I find this very difficult to cope with. I mean, I can remember once upon a time where we had actual analysis on our news. Might not have agreed with it many times, but there was a real attempt to try and reason things through. It's happening increasingly little now.
And a case in point is with the officer, the story of the officer during January 6th, that whole story, which is a complete fiction. They made everything up, and we now know the truth about that officer. And people in the live stream, I'm sure you guys know who I'm talking about.
Yes.
If someone wants to throw the name in there of that officer into the live stream so people know who I'm talking about as well. But even Tucker Carlson actually broke it down. He mentioned it the other day. The whole thing is complete fiction. The entire narrative about what happened to that officer on January 6th, completely made up. Everything from beginning to end. And another point I want to make, Alexander, before you comment, is mainstream media. We think of the U.S. when we think about mainstream media, or in the U.K. We think, because these countries have very big media stations and channels, traditional, very, very big channels, the BBC or ABC, NBC. But the mainstream media propaganda in smaller countries throughout Europe is pervasive. I see it here. Everything they say is just complete fiction. Even in small countries, the lies that they put out there is laughable. It's just not as slick as it is in the UK or the US. So it's much easier to spot. But I'm pretty sure in every country in Europe, you're seeing the same BS from all the mainstream media channels.
Absolutely, without exception, and I of that there is no doubt at all. I mean, the Germans even have expressions for it. I mean, I've heard of, there's a German expression. I don't know what the German words are, or at least I do, but I'm not going to try and pronounce it. It's the lying press, the lying media, and that's what a lot of people say in Germany. On the subject of that police officer, Andrew McCarthy, who writes for National Review and who's a former US federal prosecutor, and is, by the way, somebody who's highly critical of Donald Trump and who sort of supported the impeachment, though he seems to be backtracking a little now. He's actually published a very, very interesting article on the question of this police officer, in which he makes the point that the Democrats have cited this in the impeachment case that they brought, but it's entirely based, what they cited, on media stories. Those media stories are now crumbling. And at the same time, if the House impeachment managers actually have information about this story, given that they've cited it, especially if that information is exculpatory, as it may very well be, they are under a duty, or should be under a duty, because it is a fundamental principle of American justice, to make that information public, and they have not done so. So it's actually quite an interesting article, and he makes a very, very forceful point.
Well, they would be obligated to reveal that if this was a real trial, if it was a real trial, a real impeachment. But because the whole thing is fake, it's complete theater. There are no rules, there are no obligations, because it's all theater, it's all show. Before I get back to the super chats, Alexander, what should people be looking at? What do you think is really serious right now that everybody should be focusing on, whether you're in the US or Europe? People are looking at the impeachment, it's theater, but what is going on that people need to be saying, oh my God, oh crap, this is some serious stuff that's going on in the world. And these channels and this Senate, this Congress is showing me this stupidity when they should be focusing on X, Y, and Z.
Yes, I mean, I should say, one of the reasons I talk a lot about the impeachment is because obviously it's a subject that, for personal reasons, is very close to me. And when you said that it's, again, being conducted with no rules or with disregard for all the accepted rules, you are absolutely right. And I can't tell you how personally painful for me watching that is. I mean, as I said in a program I did on my own channel, I think we did it on our channel, actually. I mean, if you want to see what a real trial is like, well, watch To Kill a Mockingbird and see what Atticus Finch does. That's much more like a real trial than what you're getting in the Senate.
My cousin Vinny is more of a real trial than
what real trial. Well, actually, that's a very good point, actually, because there are some remarkable similarities there. Anyway, I'm digressing. But what is really going on? Well, the economics is really going on. I mean, that is extremely worrying. The fact that there are all those thousands of troops still in Washington, D.C., that is real. I mean, the narrative that has created them being there may not be real, but their presence is real, and it's worrying, and it does call for some very serious questions. We also see these military deployments in Syria, which are very disturbing, and one does wonder exactly what is going on there. That suggests to me something very serious is being prepared and is going on in Syria, and that could be extremely dangerous. All of this at the same time as the Biden administration seems to be working overtime to demoralize the US armed forces. Now, we all know what I'm talking about, but they're even talking about the United States not wanting to pursue kinetic policies anymore. So on the one hand, they're asking the military to do all kinds of things. On the other hand, they're doing all kinds of things which, if you know military people, as I do, I used to advise them, you will know that military people would be deeply upset about, deeply demoralized about, might persuade them that perhaps staying in the military is not for them. So all of that is going on at one and the same time. Then we have these very disturbing economic policies which are still being pursued and which are making our societies ever more unequal. Again, I read a fascinating article by Ambrose Evans Pritchard in the Daily Telegraph, who is saying that things are now getting so bad that there are even some people in Davos, this is, the World Economic Forum type of people, starting to get worried and saying this is going too forward, too far, and too fast, and that it might actually trigger a reaction. So, I mean, even those people are starting to get concerned, well, all of us should be concerned. But it's happening apace. And at the same time, we see growing cracks, I think, within the European Union. And this business of the medications is only a small part of it. And of course, we see behind it all, you may see this as a cause for hope. Some people do. You may see it as a cause for worry. A lot of other people do, which is this growing convergence of Chinese and Russian power. Now they're routinely exercising together. They've started to go on air patrols with each other, which is something very new, actually. They're even starting to hint for the first time that, this strategic partnership is more than just that. It might actually be a real alliance. So confronting the West in Europe, because that's what Russia does, confronting the West in the Pacific and all those places, which China does. I mean, that is a challenge, the like of which the West has never faced, from two countries which in aggregate possess manufacturing capability and natural resources equal to or greater than those of the West. And that has never happened before.
Yeah. The world is it's fragmenting at a very quick pace. And the interesting thing is that it's also fragmenting online as well. And
absolutely.
And I wouldn't be surprised in the next year or two if you actually do start to see Russia and China and other countries just completely do away with many of the big networks in the US and start building their own online presence as well, just to stay safe, just to keep their countries rational and safe. I mean, you see, going back to India, Modi sent out a lot of warnings to Twitter. And he said, and I did a program on this, he said to Twitter, if you guys don't handle misinformation in India about my government, I'm going to take action. I mean, he talked about jail sentences and arrests.
Yes.
So I think you're going to start to see a lot of countries start to block off a lot of the sites that in the past they let run pretty free in their country and caused a lot of trouble. We have to be honest. They did cause a lot of trouble, a lot of color revolutions, Arab Springs, regime changes. Ever since they attacked President Trump, everything has changed now. Everything has changed.
Absolutely. Can I just say, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up because, of course, for the first time, you're starting to get talk in Russia. And this isn't just talk. I mean, this is talk backed by planning and action about actually separating Russia from the World Wide Web. I mean, this isn't something that's happened before, but they're starting to say, look, we have all the means to create the necessary infrastructure here. We have our own internet companies. Obviously, they're not global companies in the way that the US companies at the moment are, but they're big in Russia. Companies
they don't need them to be global.
They don't need them to be global. That's the point. But I mean, that they're increasingly saying we don't want these companies here anymore because they are not what they pretend to be. So we are going to start moving increasingly towards creating a self-sufficient and closed internet space. In other words, they're following the Chinese line. And I'm not saying the Russians have yet made that full decision, but they are making preparations, which they can do. They have the resources to do it, which would make that possible. And at the same time, it's important to remember that, we're talking about differences between governments. The Russians and the Chinese ultimately, the governments control their companies. Jack Ma, as we know, we don't know the whole story, but clearly he's been in some kind of trouble with the Chinese authorities. And he's now resurfaced and he's, making clear that he remains, a loyal servant of the Chinese nation and all that sort of thing. But the fact of the matter is, he doesn't run things in the way that some people in the United States, in the internet, in the tech companies might think they do. He is not an oligarch in the way that they are.
I would be surprised if Zuckerberg and Dorsey actually run things as well.
I agree with that.
I'm just saying that. I would be very surprised.
I agree, actually. I mean, I think it's a lot more subtle than that. What they do have, of course, is that they are useful in that they can come before Congress and tweet and explain things and do all that sort of thing. But I would agree, actually. But anyway, the point is the Chinese authorities have demonstrated publicly who is in control in their country. In the US, it's a lot less clear.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. Tahil is a new member to the drag community. Jade is a new member to the drag community. Welcome to the drag community. Valley S, $20 super chat. Thank you, Valley S, for that super chat. Hope you are doing well. From Raul Pinto, a super chat. As I have completely stopped watching MSM, I only get my news from online channels like the Duran. Keep it up. Thank you very much, Raul, for that. Flying Boar is a $5 super chat update on Nord Stream 2. You've done a video on Nord Stream 2 that just went up before we did our live. So you want to just give a quick update?
Very, very, very quickly. I mean, there's been a flurry of comments from the Germans. I mean, Steinmeier, who's the president, says that it's a bridge to Russia and must be protected. Heiko Maas, the German foreign minister, who's posed as the most anti-Russian political figure within the German government, he's also said that it's a bridge to Russia, it must be protected. The Ukrainians are very unhappy with those comments, but there we are. There's been information now that the Germans offered to $1 billion to the US in terms of natural gas payments, liquefied natural gas payments to the US to get sanctions lifted. And there's also talk that the Biden administration is now in discussion with the Germans about setting up a mechanism whereby the sanctions on Nord Stream 2 are in effect lifted, or at least they're not enforced. And in return, the Germans agree that if the Russians cut off gas to Ukraine, then the Germans will stop importing Russian gas via Nord Stream 2. And I've explained in my video that that's a complete fantasy because there is no conceivable way in that kind of situation that the Germans would actually forego Russian gas. At the same time, Fortuna, this Russian pipe-laying vessel, is now busy laying the pipes in the Baltic Sea, and the talk is that that pipe laying will be finished in April, and the pipeline will finally start operating properly in June. So we are now in the home stretch, and it looks as if it is inevitable. There are going to be discussions in about a week's time. A European Council meeting is expected. There's talk of more sanctions. All the indications are that those sanctions will be against individuals rather than, sectors of the Russian economy. Nord Stream 2 will almost certainly not be included. And just to emphasize the point, Navalny Lavrov in that interview that I've just been talking about, the one which he made with Vladimir Solovyov, has said that if the Europeans are reckless enough to start imposing across-the-board sanctions on critical aspects of the Russian economy, like, the gas industry. He didn't mention the gas industry, but that's probably one that he's thinking about, or perhaps things like cutting off Russia from SWIFT, then the Russians will retaliate by breaking off relations with the EU. So he's very strong language from Russia, very conciliatory language. Well, language from Germany that they're determined to complete Nord Stream 2 and that they're determined to maintain some kind of contact with Russia. So Nord Stream 2 now looks inevitable, and even the Biden administration is softening over it. Actually, I shouldn't correct that. It's not surprising that the Biden administration should soften over it, because I've never got the sense that these people really want to take the Germans on.
Yeah. That plays perfectly into the theme of this live stream, in that, that while they're going to Russia to try and procure some help with the shot, with Sputnik V, while they're working with Russia to get energy into the continent, Germany is working with Russia to get Nord Stream 2 online, because they know they don't have any other choice other than Nord Stream 2. They continue to just move forward with stupid sanctions. It is so dumb. I mean, it's, my sense is that Lavrov and Putin and Russia are just like, you guys are you are absolute clowns. You're absolute clowns. And we'll play your theater and we'll play this show, but you guys are sinking. I'm sure that Putin and Lavrov are just looking at people like Merkel and just saying, my God, I can't believe that you're going to still pull this sanction stuff on us, and that you're going to still deal with this Navalny stuff. You want to talk about theater and reality. The fact that they have Navalny and they prop him up to be some sort of liberal Democrat shows how ridiculous the whole thing is.
Yes.
Navalny if Navalny was in the United States, AOC would be pulling your hair at what a sovereign nationalist Navalny is.
Yes.
I mean, literally, AOC would be hating on the guy. That is how far away from progressive liberal Navalny is. And yet they prop him up as some sort of liberal Democrat, and they create this whole fake narrative about this chemical Skripal type thing that happened to him, and he had to go to Germany. And once again, no investigation, nothing. And then he returns back to the country because he fears for his life. It is the most ridiculous stuff in the world. And now they're going to put sanctions on Russia because of it.
Well, indeed. I mean, this is it. I mean, but I would add that the Russians are giving every indication now that they have absolutely had enough, and the Russian media has been utterly scathing. I mean, they've been talking in the most forceful terms about all of this. And Zakharova, the Russian spokeswoman, she's actually made a comment. I'm going to quote what the TASS dispatch says. Headlines. This is Zakharova, the Russian Foreign Ministry spokesman. Moscow to quash Western meddling in internal affairs, says diplomat. The Western countries are conducting a massive anti-Russian campaign with the aim of destabilizing the domestic political situation in Russia, but Moscow will invariably quash such attempts. That's what Zaharov has said. So they are an utterly uncompromising mood, and that comment shows it, and Lavrov's comments to Solovyov show it also. They have had enough. They're not prepared to play these games anymore. They will accept dealing with the EU, but on their terms, not on these absurd terms that the EU constantly and incessantly tries to impose on them. So if the EU wants to bring up Navalny, they will bring up Catalonia, but they will not sit by and be lectured.
And I forgot to say the best part is when you have someone like Anthony Blinken actually tweet about how Russia doesn't respect protester rights and doesn't respect the human rights to assemble. That to me that just said it all. This is coming from Biden, from the Democrats, and from a guy like Blinken, who's going to lecture other countries about the rights to protest and censorship and free speech and human rights. It's beyond laughable. It really is beyond laughable.
Absolutely. And again, I mean, this brings up what happened during the Borrell visit, because Borrell, apparently, when he started bringing up all these things, was shown by the Russians film. You can actually see it on the Foreign Ministry website, and they tweeted it, of riot police in various Western countries and the kind of things they do against Western protesters. So, this is something the Russians have never done before in this way, but they are doing it now. And of course, people like Borrell come away extremely upset, because it's fine for Borrell and Blinken to read out lectures to other people, but they absolutely do not want or will not tolerate and cannot accept having lectures read back to them. That's something that nobody is allowed to do.
All right. Mm-hmm. Let's get back to some more super chats here. Let's see. From Hunger, random question, but what are your thoughts on the legacy of Eleftherios Venizelos?
Well, indeed, very interesting question. I should say my grandfather.
You might want to explain. Venizelos he's often seen as the father of, I would say he's seen as the father of the modern Greek state.
Absolutely,
that's how we describe him.
Absolutely. Yes, let's just say he was a Greek patriot. He was a person from a prominent background in the island of Crete. At the beginning of the 20th century, he first led Crete to independence from the Ottoman Empire and union with Greece. He then became prime minister of Greece. He was a brilliant diplomat. He was somebody who led Greece into the First World War on the side of the Allies, and who managed to expand Greek territory. He practically doubled it in size and brought Greece, lots of regions of Greece, into union with Greece itself. He fell out with the monarchy in Greece. He set up a republic. That led to there were all kinds of events that led to a catastrophe where Greece was defeated by Turkey during the time of Kemal Atatürk. There was a political crisis. Venizelos eventually came out on top. He became leader of a short-lived Greek republic, which carried out major reforms in Greece, including extensive reforms of land ownership. So he is a hugely well-regarded figure in Greece. He is, many people admire him as the greatest statesman that Greece has had since it became independent. As Alex said, many see him as the father, if you like, of the nation. I would add that my grandfather, Theodore Stefanidis, was for a time his personal secretary. So I used to hear lots of stories about Venizelos from him. And he is also, I believe, related by marriage to our present Prime Minister Mitsotakis, though I'm not absolutely sure about that. But Mitsotakis is also from Crete, and indeed from a very prominent Cretan family. So this is who Venizelos is, and I think we miss people like this. Venizelos was a real leader. He was a personality. He was a man of great culture. Eventually a convinced Democrat, and an extraordinary figure in some ways. Now, I'm afraid I've lost I've lost after all that long historical digression. I've forgotten the original question.
Well, I think you answered it. Your thoughts
Yes,
on Venezuela.
yes, Venezuela, yes.
And I think the main point there is, once again, plays to this this live stream, in that you don't have leaders anymore of that stature, Venizelos or de Gaulle or Churchill or Thatcher or any. Once again, it's not about whether you like them or not, or what you think of their place in history, but they were larger than life leaders. And you know, the U.S. The U.S. was there with Trump. They were there. They had a larger than life important historical figure. Well, and you know, it would have been interesting to see what would have happened with another 4 years. But I mean, that's the point. Is now you have a Europe where you just don't have that. I'm trying to think. I mean, who do you think is a larger than life leader in Europe? I mean, the only person I can think of is, at this moment, Orban. Well, I'm trying to think of anyone else that has any type of backbone or any type of gravitas, and no one comes to mind.
Well, indeed. I mean, this is exactly the point. I mean, at the moment, Orban, again, you may agree with him, you may disagree with him, but he is a personality. He's a very strong personality. None of the others remotely are. I mean, Macron tries to be, and it always collapses, in my opinion, into bad farce. Even when he says things I agree with, it never really seems to work with Macron, because you think that at the end of the day, he's not really a serious person. Now, on the subject of Trump, actually, again, Lavrov actually made some comments about Trump, which are quite interesting, which is that he said that Trump was a sparkling personality. I mean, it's quite clear that Lavrov, at least, had great respect for him and liked him. So this is all in that same interview that we've heard so much about discussed so much on this program, that he actually said some rather complimentary things about Trump, which was quite interesting.
That is interesting. All right,
here we go. I'll just say a striking politician and personality. He is a striking personality. I remember 2 meetings with him when I was paying visits to Washington, and his talks with Russian President Putin, which I attended. Trump is a striking politician. See, that's what Lavrov said.
Well, you're getting a compliment from the best diplomat in the world.
Absolutely.
There's no debate about that.
Absolutely. I would add, by the way, today is the 12th of February. Today is the anniversary of the birthday of it's Abraham Lincoln's birthday. Now, if you want to think of leadership, well, there you go again. You may have all kinds of views about Lincoln. I know many people do, but that is the quality of leadership that the US once had.
All right. From Mark Hewitt, £5 super chat. What are your thoughts on the proposed Florida travel bans? That is an interesting story. Have you heard about this?
No, I haven't, but perhaps
it's that real quick. It's very simple. The Biden White House is actually thinking of banning people in Florida from traveling as some sort of punishment for doing so well with handling the pandemic and the shot and the lockdowns and all that stuff, which they didn't really have. Yeah. In other words, for keeping your state pretty much open and functioning and viable, and having a lot of Americans move to Florida because they want some sort of sense of leadership from DeSantis and some sense of normalcy. The Biden White House is looking to punish them. And DeSantis came out with a statement and said, they're just not going to put up with it.
Well, of course not. I mean, I ask the inevitable question when I hear about these extraordinary authoritarian and completely misconceived steps. Is it legal? I'm sure it's not. Does anybody care anymore? Does it matter whether it's legal or not? Will it still be imposed in some ways? Because this is the real worry that one has increasingly about these things. We see this steady drift towards ever more authoritarian responses and collective punishments, because let's face it, this is what it is. You're going to stop people from Florida moving in that way. You're going to impose across the board ban on movements in that kind of fashion. Florida being, of course, a state of the Union, which is the United States of America, with Floridans having the same rights under the Constitution and the law one assumes, as all other Americans. Who is the president of the United States who's sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution? Who is he to take all that away? I wonder whether this is even legal. But as we have seen repeatedly over the last 5 years, things that are illegal in the United States now unfortunately regularly happen, and the people who do them seem to be able to do them without having any, without being held accountable for doing them in any way.
All right. From Hunger, Super Chat says, sub to both your channels. Fantastic work. Alex, thank you very much for subbing to our channels. You'll find the links down below to Alexander's channel and to my channel as well. Thank you for that Super Chat. From Toilet Sauce, €5 Super Chat. What would happen to the euro once the dollar collapses?
It will collapse with it. It would collapse with it. But I'm going to make a prediction. The euro will collapse long before the dollar does. I mean, the dollar, whatever you may think, and I mean, I've made very strong criticisms about the economic policies that are being followed in the US, and the US dollar will, I think, sooner or later definitely lose its primacy as its world currency. But the United States is a real country. It's a nation. It's the dollar is its currency. It has a treasury department. It has a proper tax system. It has a government. The European Union has none of these things. It's not a nation. It's not a state, or properly speaking, it's not a state. It doesn't have a tax system. And if it did, my God help us, because the kind of tax system that Ursula von der Leyen and her associates would come up with would make any other tax system in any other country seem a wonder by comparison. I mean, but anyway, it doesn't have that. So I can't imagine the euro surviving for very long. Perhaps briefly, when the dollar dips, you will see periods of euro strength, as you are seeing at the moment. But these are ephemeral. If the dollar collapses, it will take down the euro with it. Of that, I have no doubt.
All right. From Moon Swan Silverlight, I'm proud of my country's history. We need to accept that there's both good and bad and embrace it. If you try to erase the past, then what future do you have? The
Correct.
past simply repeats.
What profound words, what true and profound words. Every country has its dark pages in its history, but if you're talking about the United States, it's had some absolutely glowing and wonderful pages, and things that people look up to, not just in the United States but around the world. And what we see, and I'm going to say this, I think this may be a bit controversial, but what we see is a concerted attempt by some people to talk about the bad things to the exclusion of the others. And that is profoundly wrong. And of course, it does nothing for the international reputation of the United States.
From Flying Boar, $5 Super Chat. Canada was one of those countries that sanctioned Russia, while Biden abandoning Keystone Pipeline. Excel, talk about getting a dose of your own medication.
Well, so true, so profoundly true, but don't expect Justin Trudeau to make that parallel. I mean, that's the very last thing he will ever do, because, of course, well, that's the other thing we have. We don't have leaders who stand up for their countries. I mean, I can remember Margaret Thatcher, strong anti-communist though she was, vigorously opposing sanctions, unilateral sanctions, when the US tried to impose them on Russian pipeline projects. Wasn't even gas that was being supplied to Britain through those pipelines. The British were contractors for some of the work on those pipelines, but they weren't actually receiving the gas. But I can remember her coming along and saying, this is completely wrong. The United States should not do this. Contracts are sacred and should be honored. That's the whole foundation of international commercial and indeed domestic commercial law, and these kind of unilateral sanctions are wrong and misconceived, and people in Washington respected her and paid attention to what she said. And of course, what you're going to get with Justin Trudeau is the exact opposite. He's not going to make that kind of linkage. is going to press on with more and more sanctions against China, Russia, you name it. And of course, he will get rewarded with cancellations of the Keystone pipeline, and he will have nothing of meaningful or substantive to say. And if he does try to say anything, people will pay no attention because, in contrast to Margaret Thatcher, they don't respect him.
Yeah. Trudeau is like he's like a larger than life figure, but for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? It's like,
yeah.
He just survives everything. It seems all the scandals that come his way.
Yeah,
it just brushes off of him. I mean, I understand that he's getting with each cycle, each election cycle, and each year that goes by, he's getting more and more unpopular. But he is still there. He is still in charge of Canada, very much like Merkel in that sense. And that
absolutely,
they have this. They're celebrities. Celebrity leaders, but for all the wrong reasons.
Yes, they have this bedrock of support, which, as you say, is gradually being chipped away as the middle class constituency that votes for them comes under ever greater pressure. But unfortunately, the ideological narratives that people have been fed have had a consequence, and they do shape votes. They do affect the way people vote to a remarkable degree. So that is why people like Trudeau and Merkel and Macron are still there. Why Macron was elected, because Macron is very like Trudeau, in my opinion. I mean, ultimately, a very unreal person. I mean, frankly, I find Trudeau almost a cartoon character. I mean, that's a bit rude, but almost he is. And yet, at the same time, he's able to talk a certain way that people of a certain type still relate to. And Macron does the same, and people will vote for him because they say, well, Macron is going to save us from the hordes that Marine Le Pen will unleash on us if she ever becomes president of France. Those hordes may not exist. They may be indeed French people like you, but that's how a lot of people still think.
Yeah, it doesn't matter how cartoonish they are, like Merkel and Trudeau or even Macron. They are cunning. And they have this persona on TV or in the media where you sit there and you look at them and you say, this guy Trudeau can't be as ruthless as I read about, when I look at all his scandals and look at everything that goes down. There's no way in hell that this guy's that ruthless. Or you look at Merkel, who's a very quiet, very soft-spoken type of leader, and you say she can't be that cunning and that ruthless, but they are. I mean, they really, really are that cunning and that ruthless. And when you look at the Obama Rat Pack, this group of neoliberals that Obama formed, it is Merkel and it is Trudeau that are still standing. Everyone else has pretty much left, and even Macron, he came on the tail end of Hollande. Yes. When you look at, which two of the neoliberal celebrities are still standing, it is Trudeau and it is Merkel.
Absolutely. I mean, the one thing that they both have, and I mean, I've followed Merkel especially very closely, is a genius for intrigue. I mean, that there is no question at all. A genius for intrigue, a genius for wire pulling behind the scenes, for putting all the right people in all the right places, and for being able to sort of hold things together from behind the scenes. But of course, they wouldn't be able to do that if the media in Canada and in Germany were doing its job properly. It's a construct which needs various parts to hold itself together. If the media in Germany were as critical of Merkel as it should be, if it made 5% of the criticisms of Merkel that the American media made of Donald Trump, the whole Merkel thing would collapse like a house of cards. And I'm sure in Canada it would be exactly the same.
Well, Canada is the same, yeah, exactly. Yeah, but they position themselves with the media in order to solidify that relationship.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. Well, they are superb at it. And by the way, the absolute grand master of knowing how to use and manipulate the media was Barack Obama. I mean, people talk about Tony Blair being good at it, but Tony Blair was an apprentice compared to Obama. Obama did it outstandingly, and he did it in a way that kept him invisible. It was really an extraordinary performance. So the result was all sorts of things happened whilst Obama was president, and nobody noticed. Quite amazing, actually.
Yeah, the Obama Rat Pack. That's why I call it the Obama Rat Pack. All right, from Idiosyncratic, £5 super chat. Hope you are well. Love from us. Thank you very much, Idiosyncratic, for that super chat. From Anatoly, 449 rubles. What do you think about the bill which will allow big tech to essentially create their own governments, and why introduce it now?
Which bill is this? Is this a new one in which country?
It's more
There's so many bills coming forward now. I mean, this is the other thing. We're having this flood of legislation or proposed legislation in the United States that even my head is starting to spin. But what is this latest one? It sounds rather concerning, actually. Hello?
Let me take myself off mute. We should do a video on this. Look, I mean,
yeah.
You know, big tech is it's hard to say who owns who. Is it big tech that owns the government, or is the government on top of big tech? That's kind of one of the questions that I'm interested in exploring and finding out.
Absolutely. Well, can I just say, of course, that is a classic hallmark of an oligarchical system, where you aren't able to draw the dividing lines between who is in government and who is not. And people exercise huge amounts of political power outside the state structures. I mean, that was how Russia was in the 90s. I mean, in the 90s, if you'd gone to Russia, the minister was not an important person. The president wasn't a particularly important person. There were all sorts of shadowy people in the background who who really ran things. And I'm afraid the West and the United States is starting to look like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you have the Biden administration that is now talking about Section 230, but in all the wrong directions, and they're crafting a reevaluation of 230, which a new way of wording 230 that will completely strengthen the big tech oligarchs, the big tech monopolies, and just obliterate the little guys. And it's big tech is, I mean, they're so embedded with the Biden White House that they're pretty much writing this legislation, and that is the reward that they are getting for essentially electing Biden, getting Biden into office. And I think big tech played probably the most important role in getting Biden into office.
It played the decisive role in getting Biden into office, and it's playing the decisive role in keeping him there. I have to be very clear about this. I mean, this is why we see all the things that are going on across the social media at the moment. People being thrown off social media. It's because, of course, there's a desire on the part of some people to keep things as they are.
Yeah, we'll do a video on that because it's an interesting development. Not many people are talking about it. From Flying Boar, who is bigger, China or India, when it comes to military and economy?
Oh, there's no comparison. At the moment, China is far bigger. I mean, I didn't look, I haven't seen the latest figures, but I mean, China's economy is multiples greater than India's. And if you're talking about the military imbalance, again, China's military is far stronger. And I mean, at least in conventional terms. And of course, the important difference also is that China has its own military industries which work, whereas India still has to import arms from all sorts of countries. So, China builds its own fighter jets, its own transport aircraft, its own ships, its own submarines, its own tanks. India still imports all those things. It's tried at various times to create its own military industries, but it's never been particularly successful until now. So I've seen, commentaries about, the Indian tank, the Arjuna, that it doesn't work particularly well, and those sort of things. There are some areas where the Indians are beginning to get their work, on top of things, like Some of their ballistic missile technologies are apparently starting to get quite advanced, and obviously they got nuclear weapons too. But at the moment, China is by far the stronger country, and if anything, the gap has grown recently. Now, having said that, India is a country with enormous potential. It's got tremendous intellectual skills. It will no doubt make huge progress in the future. By the way, on the subject of the pandemic, it's the world's biggest producer of medications, including the ones we hear so much about. But again, that's not an endorsement of anything.
All right. From Flying Boar, China banning BBC. What's going on there?
Oh, well,
that was easy to predict.
That was complete. Well, I think we did predict it. Yeah. I think we said it would happen, and sure enough, it has. I mean, that's the thing about the Chinese. I mean, they will not, they will not hold back from any fight. I mean, the British took this extraordinary decision to ban China CGTN, which, by the way, I mean, I don't want to be unduly critical sometimes, but watching CGTN, which I have, had an acquaintance with, I have to say, I mean, the idea that this is any kind of major outlet in Britain, or that it shapes opinion here, is inconceivable. I mean, it's not even a proper TV broadcaster, in my opinion. But there we are. The British took that step, and the BBC, as a result, in China got shut down. The BBC has far more traction in China than CGTN has in Britain. So in that respect, Britain has lost. But as Alex and I said in that program we did, ultimately the BBC has vastly more global reach than CGTN ever will or ever could. So in a way, if you're going to start creating dividing lines between, media spaces, the British and the Americans are playing from a stronger hand.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it was very much a trial balloon. I think that they know that CGTN is not that consequential on the world scene, but it's boiling that frog, very slowly. So they get CGTN out, and eventually they're going to move to RT and to other channels. And it's what we said in our video, that everything is going to fragment, not only in the internet and the social media space, but it's going to fragment in the mainstream media space as well. And the US and the UK have a huge advantage right now, but China and Russia and other countries that are going to be blocked out of the Western media space, if they're smart and clever, they'll find a way to catch up. If they're smart and clever, they'll find a way to catch up. They'll be forced to catch up, but you're going to see a fragmentation there as well.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what is going to happen. I mean, I would point out that apparently, I mean, I don't know, and this may be completely not the case, but I've heard that the Spanish version of RT, for example, has quite large penetration now in Latin America. It's apparently a more successful channel, much more successful channel than the English language one is, and presumably in countries like Argentina and wherever, they won't be banning it. So I mean, in a way, if we're going to see an information war, it's going to play out in all kinds of interesting ways. But so far, we must be absolutely clear about this. On this field, the Western powers, especially the English language Western powers, still have a tremendous inbuilt advantage.
Absolutely. Yeah, hit that like, guys. 12 likes to get to 1K. Hit that like. Do us a solid. Do us a favor and get this to 1,000K. Let's see. From Flying Boar, update on Myanmar.
Well, indeed, what is happening there now? I mean, Myanmar is a country which, again, flows in and out of the news. I can remember quite recently, it doesn't seem so long ago for me, when Aung San Suu Kyi, the former prime minister, she wasn't the leader, the effective leader of Myanmar, who's just been overthrown in this coup, was here in Britain. She was the subject of all sorts of campaigns and rallies. And of course, she got the Nobel Prize because she stood up to the military government, and then she became leader of the country. And then it turned out that she didn't do all the things, or wasn't able to do all of the things that her Western backers expected. So she fell out of favor. Now there's been this coup by the military, which has made her again more popular once more. I have to say, I think that the Biden administration is going to try and impose sanctions on Burma. I know there have been protests in a number of cities, but I would be extremely surprised if the Burmese military, the Tatmadaw, the Myanmar military, wasn't able to consolidate its control of the country. And of course, it will have China's backing. It's got good relations with China. So it's, if you like, going to play out with Myanmar becoming once again even more closer to China than it has been recently. So a geopolitical win for China, if you like.
All right, from Flying Boar, Ukraine refuses to order Sputnik vaccine even though they are doing worse. Why?
Well, because it's Russian. It's as simple as that. I mean, the kind of things that are coming out of Ukraine about Russia now are becoming ever more extreme. And of course, the Ukrainian government has just recently closed down 3 Russian language TV stations in Ukraine. It's important to stress these are Ukrainian channels. These are not Russian channels, as some people have implied. These were internal domestic Russian language broadcasters. And the Ukrainian government closed them down because they said they were pushing disinformation. The fact is that Zelensky, who is the president of Ukraine, who was elected with all this hope and optimism, has turned out to be a massive failure and disappointment. Ukraine has gone through even ever deeper economic crisis. It's had all kinds of problems on multiple fronts. Zelensky has been unable to root out corruption. He's been unable to find a way to end the conflict in the east. And what he is doing is what every single Ukrainian leader since Ukrainian independence does when they are in trouble, which is that they drift from a pro-Russian position or a relatively pro-Russian position, which they take when they are elected. Even Yushchenko briefly flirted with that, into an ever more extreme anti-Russian position to shore up their base, their electoral base in the nationalist West, which is where Ukrainian leaders are made and broken. So that's what Zelensky is doing. So of course he's not going to accept Sputnik V, and he's not going to allow Russian TV channels, and he's going to say all sorts of awful things about Russia and awful things about Russian leaders, even though he became president as the person who spoke Russian, came from a Russian area, and was elected to lead the country on the votes of Russian speakers. Unsurprising, completely predictable. I'm afraid Ukraine is in a trap. It doesn't seem to have a way out.
Flying Boar's next question, next super chat is update on Ukraine. I just want to say one thing about Ukraine, a couple of thoughts there as to what you said. I believe that Poroshenko and Zelensky as well, their Ukrainian wasn't even that good from what I've heard. They spoke Ukrainian, but it was, broken Ukrainian. And, their first language is Russian. And Zelensky specifically was elected on the back of heavy support from Russian-speaking regions, including, Odessa and regions more towards the east. So it's once again, it is clown world to see these presidents who were elected because of, especially Zelensky, because of the fact that they wanted to just be done with this anti-Russian sentiment in Ukraine and just get back to business of helping the country out and helping the country move forward, that they're now turning on their own Russian-speaking citizens. Once again, it is a lack of leadership and complete clown world.
Absolutely, entirely so. That's absolutely right. I mean, I would add, by the way, that this is one of the other, secrets that isn't actually a secret, which is that all these people, when they talk to each other, when Zelensky talks to his ministers, in private, he talks to them in Russian.
Russian.
They all talk in Russian with each other. It's universally known. That's the language that they communicate with each other. But of course, officially, in theory, we're only allowed to speak Ukrainian. And you're quite right. He has completely let down, betrayed, if you will, the Russian speakers who voted for him, who did so in the belief which he promoted that he would stand up for them.
An update on Ukraine from Flying Boar. To answer that question, we've given an update on Ukraine, but keep your eyes on what happens in Ukraine, people people that are viewing us in the United States.
Oh, yeah.
Because a lot of the things that the U.S. has done in Ukraine, once again, are also type of trial balloons that get re-imported into the U.S. Case in point, the banning of the media companies. Yeah. It was the U.S. that came out with a tweet, once again, that I believe it was Blinken or the State Department that said, I'm sorry, the embassy, the U.S. Embassy in Kiev, that said that they fully support the banning of media companies, of Ukrainian media companies in the country in order to protect against Russian, what's the word? Misinformation. Once again, that word, Russian misinformation. The U.S., the United States of America, cheering on the banning of media companies in a country. And all I could sit there and say to myself was, I can just see this getting re-imported into the U.S. in no time.
Absolutely. Well, this has been the thing. I mean, the United States now regularly does to itself things which its various agencies have been doing in other countries. It is inevitable that sooner or later that would happen. You cannot act in one way abroad and then expect the same people to come back to the United States and behave differently. And it's now come.
Yeah. All right. From Moon Dragon, SEK 50, Sergei Lavrov just stated that if the EU continues with sanctions policy, then they are done with the EU. What is your opinion on this? We've talked about this a little bit, but you want to add on to it?
We have. I think this was something of a misunderstanding, and it flows from excited reactions within Russia in the Russian media. In fact, he was actually rather more measured. What he apparently said was, if the European Union goes all the way and starts imposing sanctions upon us in such a way as to affect our vital economic interests, we will retaliate by closing down our relations with the EU. Now, he didn't make clear exactly what he meant by that, whether he meant that the Russians would stop dealing with the EU Commission and its various agencies, or whether it would start, blocking relations with the EU, the leading EU countries. We don't quite know, but that's what he said. But in subsequent comments, the Russians, including Dmitry Peskov, who is Putin's spokesman, have made very clear that this isn't what the Russians are looking to do. It is what they will do if the EU starts taking those kind of across-the-board sweeping measures to destabilize the Russian economy. I mean, things like blocking gas exports, disconnecting Russia from SWIFT, that kind of thing. I don't think there is any agenda in the EU to do anything like that.
That would be a nuclear option move if they did do stuff like that.
Exactly.
Yeah. From Flying Boar, here it is. What do you guys think of Greta Thunberg angering India on farm protests?
Well, I mean, can I say I'm perhaps unique here. I'm rather sorry for this person because it seems to me that she's very young and she's been thrust into the maelstrom, if you like, of great international politics, and she's been encouraged to make comments of this kind. And as a result, she finds herself pitted against one of the great powers of the world, which is the government of India. Do you really want to do that to somebody who is so young in this way? And it is very much part of the pattern of manipulative politics that we see increasingly in the West. It is exactly what Alex was talking about: the unreal versus the real. Modi and the Indian government, you may agree with them, you may not, they are a power, they are a reality. Greta is not a reality in anything like that way. She is someone who is being set up to take the fall, and I think it's cruel.
Yeah, it is absolutely ridiculous to put her up against India. I mean, it is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
All
Yes.
right. Let's see. Let's do some more super chats here from Hugh Ritsema Carter. £5 super chat. Love you guys. What are you doing? Why are you doing your own channels now? Hope not the end of the Duran. The chemistry with both of you delivering this content is amazing. I could answer that question. Why doing our own channels? So we can get more content out to you guys. Because when we try to do as many videos together as we can, but as you guys can appreciate, just coordinating between the two of us, getting the times and getting things in order between us so we could record our videos takes time. And so we thought the best way to get more content out is for each of us to do a channel and to just be able to do videos whenever it suits us, whatever time of day, and just to be able to churn out videos as we like to get more content out to all of you.
Absolutely. Can I just say, I mean, I'm very much a night bird, and of course there's a time difference as well. So sometimes, I mean, I've done programs in the early hours, and that's fine. And because news comes up, and I quickly do a program about it. And I think that's exactly why we are completely committed to the Duran. Don't worry, we have no intention of walking away, and we love our interactions.
Our new channels are actually in order to strengthen the Duran. So
exactly. I mean, we love our interactions with each other. I mean, we absolutely, we hugely enjoy them, and we love our interactions with you, our viewers. I should say that also.
Absolutely. From Nicolas, let's see, SEK 50. Good question here. How high is the chance of Greece and Turkey going into war, considering all the daily threats and aggression from Erdogan? Also, Cyprus and Turkey issue. We need to do a video on this.
We absolutely.
The Cyprus and the Greek videos are always tough for us because obviously we can't be as objective as we would like to be. We try to be objective, but we can't. It's difficult. But what do you make of this question, Alexander? There's a lot going on between Greece and Turkey, and there is a lot of stuff going on with Cyprus and Turkey. And just real quick, and for everybody watching this, for Cyprus, they are going to be rediscussing a solution, but Turkey does want a two-state solution. They're pushing forward, and of course, Cyprus and Greece are sticking with the UN solution of a bicommunal federation. What do you make of what's going on?
Which is, by the way, consistent with international law, can I quickly say? But I mean, to come back to the question, the possibility of a conflict between Greece and Turkey is always there. It has been throughout our lives. If you ask Alex, he was a witness to a conflict between Greece and Turkey. I mean, he experienced it. He saw it himself. So, and his family, well, Greek Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots, involving the Turkish army. And of course, his family has experienced it directly and have lost property and assets as a result. So I'm afraid that is always there. It's always been there in my lifetime. Is that danger greater now? I would say probably yes. Probably yes. We've always managed to stop some way short of a general war because neither country has been interested in seeking one. But at the moment, we have a government in Turkey which has very, very grandiose ambitions for the country. Not just economic ambitions, but also they want to position Turkey as some sort of great power. And that inevitably creates collisions and conflicts and always results in Turkey testing countries around it, like Greece, like Cyprus, in a way that could lead to all sorts of bad consequences. Also, this government in Turkey, and I think I am being objective here is not fully stable. It has many opponents within Turkey itself. It faces all kinds of uncertainties about its economic position, which is very volatile. You get periods of rapid growth followed by periods of extreme recession. You see also protests in universities. You see all sorts of things playing out in Turkey itself. And that again makes the situation uncertain. So we have all of these things where we have a government that's overambitious, which lacks checks and balances, which isn't completely stable and completely secure. So yes, a possibility of a conflict does exist. But if it were to happen, then I think that Turkey would be running, and it would be Turkey that would initiate it, because there's no conceivable way that Greece would want to start initiating a conflict with Turkey. I should quickly add that if Turkey were to go that way, then it would run into massive problems. At the present time, Greek relations with the United States are good. Greece is a member of the European Union. Greece is a member of NATO. And Russia, which has been making a good relationship with Turkey, would almost certainly be horrified if it saw a conflict like that in the Eastern Mediterranean. So there are restraining factors that make a war less likely, but I cannot say that it is one that is not likely to happen at all. That's the fact. We've had conflicts in the past, and there is, I'm afraid, a risk that we might have conflicts in the future.
We talked about leaders that are larger than life, and I think it is fair to say that Erdogan is a leader that is larger than life. Would you say that Mitsotakis, the Prime Minister of Greece, and Anastasiadis, the President of Cyprus, are outmatched by Erdogan? And Erdogan has very good, and Turkey does have very, very good diplomats. And traditionally, they've had a stellar foreign policy initiative. Historically, they've been very good at international diplomacy. For that, there's no doubt about it. Okay. That's my first question to you. Are they outmatched by Erdogan? And number two is, where do you think the U.S. and Russia, are going to move with regards to Turkey? Is a rapprochement between Biden and Turkey in the works? What does that mean for Russia? Is Putin going to be, for lack of a better word, betrayed by Turkey? Because Turkey with Russia, they're antagonistic with Russia when it comes to Syria. Obviously, we know what happened in Armenia, in Nagorno-Karabakh. But on the flip side, you said that Putin seems very committed to Turkey, and we've said that Erdogan and Turkey has always seemed to be a type of blind spot for Russia. So, what do you see there happening?
Yes. Now let's turn first to Greece. I mean, I'm afraid Mitsotakis and Anastasiadis are not leaders of the force of personality that Erdogan has. And I mean, I think we need to say that straight away. I mean, Mitsotakis has shown a certain amount of diplomatic skill. That's indisputable. And we've talked about this. I mean, there's lots of people who criticize Mitsotakis in Greece for all sorts of good reasons. But on this, unquestionably, he has shown certain diplomatic skills. He makes the mistake of relying far too much on the European Union, on Europe to restrain Turkey. And Europe, I'm afraid, is a broken reed. They have never shown that consistency of purpose with Turkey that keeping Turkey in check requires. The United States, if I have to say, is a better partner in the sense that the United States is more capable, because of the way it's organized, of restraining Turkey. But here's the thing. The United States, Biden has just become president. All the talk in the media has been of Biden having bad relations with Turkey and of Turkey, therefore, moving closer to Russia. At the same time, I'm reading all these reports in the media, including, by the way, the Russian media, about how the Turks are making proposals to Biden and to the administration, to the US, to sort out their differences. And in fact, the deal that the Turks are said to be floating, this is coming from the Russian media now, is that Turkey will hand over its S-400 missiles to Azerbaijan. In other words, they will be removed from Turkey, and in return, the US will give up its support for the Kurds in Syria. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen. In fact, I understand, again from these reports, that the US has rejected that offer because, as far as the US is concerned, it needs the Kurds to pursue its objectives in Syria. And perhaps the Turks made that offer in the knowledge that the US would never accept it. But the very fact that it seems that the Turks and the Americans are talking in these ways shows that the relationship between Turkey and Russia is an unstable one, and that if the Turks and Erdogan think they can get a good deal from the Americans, they will go for it, and that the Russians will then be left high and dry. Now, I'm not saying that because I have some particular feeling that I'm partial about this. I think that is the objective reality, and there are many Russians who say it also, that the Russian leadership is overly focused on building a relationship with Turkey, which is based on unstable and unsustainable foundations.
Yeah. Rab was recently in Cyprus, and he met both leaders. And I want to ask you, where does the UK stand with regards to Greece, Turkey, and specifically, more importantly, Turkey, Cyprus, because the UK is a guarantor power in Cyprus, and the UK has traditionally, and I think this is fair to say, traditionally has taken the side of Turkey, or has aligned itself more closely with Turkey and Turkish interests. And my second question is, Mitsotakis, you mentioned Mitsotakis always relying on the EU. I absolutely agree with that. That is his flaw, but it's also built into the Mitsotakis system, and that Mitsotakis is a product of, for lack of a better word, the European deep state, maybe the European elite. I mean, this is who Mitsotakis is. He is an elite. He's an elitist via birth. He's without a doubt from one of the most politically powerful families in Greece, if not Europe. So, Mitsotakis relies on the EU for policy, and he always gets burned. Germany also always is siding with Turkey.
Yes.
Of course, that may be because of, Merkel's, dilemma with the refugees and that, but I think it goes far beyond that. Yeah. So I think that, my question to you is, how can Greece or Cyprus navigate this, given the fact that both the UK and Germany are definitely angling on the side of Turkey?
Yes, and I think you're right about Britain, by the way. I mean, can I just say, you will find in Britain, as you will find in Germany, a kind of sentimental pro-Greek language that you sometimes come across. But for the British, always ultimately the relationship with Turkey is paramount, because the British remain so obsessed with our hostility to Russia, and they see Turkey as the absolutely indispensable shield protecting the Eastern Mediterranean from Russian penetration. So they will always back Turkey in the end. They always have done. And by the way, I think this particular Conservative government, even more than some other British governments in the past. I think Boris Johnson even has some kind of family connection to Turkey. So, we are not going to see any change on British policy there, perhaps an even stronger pro-Turkish line than usual. And you can often find, by the way, commentaries in some British newspapers, especially the Daily Telegraph and the Times, saying that the US has been mistaken in getting into quarrels with Turkey, because Turkey is too important to the Western alliance to be treated in that way. So the British will back Turkey. Now, what should Greece do? Well, Greece needs to maintain its good relationship with the West. I think Greece also needs to understand that the EU is not really a firm ally. the United States is a more useful ally than the EU. You should look for strong friendships with countries like France, which, by contrast with Germany and Britain, have generally taken a pro-Greek line on many issues. But last but not least, I think the Greeks need to work much harder on their relationship with Russia, because even though Russia, as I said, has committed so much to Turkey recently, there is also, as in France, a strong tradition of being pro-Greek in Russia too. So you need to maintain a balance, which is, if we go back to Venizelos, exactly what he did. He was very skillful at talking to all the various countries, advancing Greece's national interests at the same time, and never overcommitting to anyone. Venizelos was the leader of Greece who led Greece into its wars against Turkey, which, as I said, resulted in Greece doubling in size and in population. And yet, when the moment came in the 1920s and 30s, he actually forged very good and friendly relations with Turkey. He had a very good relationship with Mustafa Kemal Ataturk and with Kemal's friend and associate İnönü, who remained leader of Turkey for many years after Kemal's death. So you need that kind of flexibility that Venizelos once had, and which unfortunately Mitsotakis lacks. Mitsotakis tends to think in very rigid lines. He says Greece is part of the EU, it's a loyal member of the EU, it should get loyalty back from the EU if it shows how loyal to the EU it is. It doesn't work that way. It isn't like that. What you've got to show to the EU is you can't take us for granted.
Yeah, I agree with you there. All right, from Flying Board, Navalny wants to be with the West, even if it means selling Russia's natural resources to them. He is groomed and built like a Yeltsin 90s Russia.
Oh, indeed. I mean, I've actually heard him. Well, I haven't heard him, but I've read him actually make exactly those kind of comments. I mean, Navalny has actually praised the 1990s, which is a very remarkable thing to do for a Russian. He actually talks about the 1990s as being, the golden age, which Russia should return to. He thinks of it in those terms. That, of course, guarantees that his support in Russia itself is going to be limited. There are some young people, very young people, school children mainly, who of course don't remember the 1990s and aren't particularly well informed about them, who are briefly attracted to him. But even they, in my experience, tend to lose interest in him once they grow up. So that is exactly what Navalny is. I mean, he's got all kinds of other ideas. I mean, he's very anti-immigrant. He's very very Russian nationalist. He talks in some ways that, as I said, in the West, the guardians of, speak would disapprove of. But he is very, very pro-West, and very much wants to open up the Russian economy, the Russian energy sector. That's always the key. It's always this desire to get hold of Russian oil and gas assets. He's very keen to do all of that. And at the same time, he thinks that the 1990s was a great time and a good thing.
Yeah. He's also very social media savvy.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. No,
he knows how to use social media for his advantage.
Absolutely. He absolutely does. Yes.
All right. Yavlinsky from Toilet Sauce.
Yes.
€5 super chat. Yavlinsky, the leader of Yabloko that kicked Navalny out, recently said that Navalny's ideas are dangerous and completely incompatible with democracy.
Well, can I just say, some of the most trenchant critics of Navalny are within the Russian liberal community. He's not very popular amongst them. I mean, I should say most Russian liberal leaders don't get on with each other. I mean, this is a deeply factionalized and bitterly divided group of people. They certainly don't accept Navalny as their leader. And on the contrary, they are hugely jealous and envious of the amount of attention he gets in the West. And those of them, like Yavlinsky, who are genuine liberals, are horrified by him, because from their point of view, what they see as his nationalism and xenophobia is something that, you know, they are completely opposed to. I mean, they are closer in some ways to the sort of Joe Biden type of liberal than they are to Navalny. I mean, that's the odd paradox of all of this.
Yeah. From Raul Pinto, $5 super chat. If the current King Salman kicks the bucket, do you think MBS would become king, or would that be anarchy in Saudi Arabia?
Well, that is an excellent question. I'm afraid none of us really knows, because, of course, what's happened with MBS is he's risen very far, very fast. We don't really know how strong his underlying position in Saudi Arabia is. He's made many enemies, many people. He does undoubtedly have some support in the country, but it's very difficult to gauge how strong that support is. And I wonder, actually, how confident he is himself about how solid that support is. And Saudi Arabia has had situations where people become kings, but only for a short time, and that they're deposed because the princes decide that they are unacceptable, and that they're removed from the monarchy and driven into exile. This happened in about 1960 to the successor of the founder of the kingdom, King Abdulaziz ibn Saud. His son, King Saud, became king for a short time and then was deposed in a coup led by his uncle, I think his brother actually, Prince Faisal, who then became King Faisal. So this kind of thing happens. We simply don't know. But I agree. I think that Saudi Arabia is weakening. I think the entire structure in Saudi Arabia is weakening. I've written articles for the Duran about this, actually, which go into all of this detail. But I mean, MBS's economic plans are completely unreal. I mean, we talk about unreality. MBS takes unreality to a completely different level. I mean, he talks about, you know, producing automated eco cities, and he spends tens of billions on these kind of improbable and wild projects, and there doesn't seem to be anybody to restrain him. So we have all of that. We have also an underlying situation in the kingdom where its economy has essentially stagnated. It's never managed to escape its position as an oil dependency. And we don't know how long that's going to go on for. And it all looks as if it's becoming more brittle all the time. And perhaps if a move is made to throw out MBS, that could bring the whole thing tumbling down, because maybe the kingdom, which in the 1950s and early 60s could absorb instability, no longer can. But with a country like Saudi Arabia, it's extremely difficult to know, because if you go to the Saudi media, well, they don't tell you anything, because it's, you know, a completely controlled country. All information is controlled from there. So from an outside observer to be able to say what is really going on inside is very difficult. I think it's a very valid question. I certainly think it needs to be, Saudi Arabia needs to be watched very closely. And I definitely think that the situation in the long term isn't sustainable. And I think that MBS, even if he survives, is not the answer to the country's problems. On the contrary, he's probably going to make them worse.
All right. From Gary Frazier, $20 super chat. Hey, guys, I haven't caught you live for a while. Keep up the good work. Thank you very much, Gary, for that super chat. From Flying Boar, two super chats that are related, actually. The first one says, are you two children of descendants of Alexander the Great? Was he Greek or Macedonian? And then the second super chat says, Europe needs someone like Alexander the Great. So I'll just speak for myself. I don't think I'm a descendant of Alexander the Great, though it would be absolutely cool to have been a descendant of Alexander the Great. Alexander, are you a descendant of Alexander the Great? And was Alexander, what was the question? Was Alexander Greek or Macedonian?
Well, first of all, I am almost certainly not descended from Alexander the Great. Secondly, Alexander the Great himself considered himself to be a Greek. In fact, he was absolutely clear about this. And of course, the Macedonians competed in the Olympic Games and all of that. So, I mean, he identified very strongly with Greece. He considered himself to be fully Greek. Spoke Greek. He would have rejected any idea that Macedonians were not Greeks. And in fact, I mean, that was just a thought that would never have occurred to him. You sometimes hear people talk about a Macedonian language that was spoken in Macedonia at that time. In fact, they spoke Greek. It was just that it was a dialect of Greek. So the Athenians, rather looked down on it, because as far as they were concerned, the Macedonians were these northern provincials. If you go to places like Vergina and you see the museum in Thessalonica of the artwork of that kingdom, firstly, it is beautiful and incredibly advanced. And again, it is clearly and unquestionably Greek. So, yes, he was a Greek. Yes, Macedonia was Greek. Yes, Macedonians were Greek. They were also, of course, Macedonians, but Macedonians at that time considered themselves and defined themselves as Greeks, just as Athenians defined themselves as Greeks, Spartans, whatever. And that's the thing people need to understand. We must not import back far into history these anachronistic concepts of Macedonians that exist today, or fall into the error of thinking that these claims that are made in the country that calls itself Macedonia, which, is part of the historic kingdom of Macedonia and all that this is somehow, that the ancient Macedonia was distinct from the rest of the Greek world, ethnically, culturally, religiously. It was not.
Yeah. I mean, I've read accounts that Alexander's kingdom was so influential and stretched so far that even there are places, even in India today, where you have Greek dialects being spoken in certain villages. That's how deep his influence was.
Absolutely. And I mean, he was in all sorts of places, all over. I mean, you find traces of him everywhere. I mean, Indian sculpture, for example, all these figures that we see of Indian gods, much of it originates from, the influence of Greek sculpture that was brought to India by the Macedonian armies, the Greek armies led by Alexander the Great. I would quickly add there was also influence back. You can see the influence of Indian ideas and philosophies on the Greeks too. There was always this interchange of ideas, because I've always been open to ideas from other places. But unquestionably, Alexander was a Greek. He thought of himself as a Greek. His people, the Macedonians of his time, thought of themselves as Greeks, and we should not make the mistake of thinking of them as anything else.
Yeah, Spartan Warrior Queen says that Sanskrit, the ancient language of India, is very similar to Greek.
It is indeed. Absolutely true. Yeah.
Excellent point. And as far as any leaders, the second super chat, any leaders in Europe, the caliber of Alexander the Great,
I think that it must be a rhetorical question.
Maybe Macron. Maybe Macron.
Macron the Great. Well, what a thought. I'm sure in his dreams.
All right. Thank you very much for the super chats. Flying Boar. Let's see. We Kieran, €5 super chat. Thank you very much for that. Flying Boar. Russia should ban Twitter and Facebook for their role in supporting recent Navalny protests.
Well, there's been talk of that in Russia, and maybe it may very well come. We're closer to that now than we've ever been. In fact, there's starting to look like an appearance of inevitability to it.
It's coming.
I think so. I mean, I can see it coming. Yeah.
It's coming. From Cactus Ray, $5 super chat. Thank you very much for that. Flying Boar. Russia got all the natural resources and minerals, yet it never is able to become an economic powerhouse like China. Why?
Well, it's a different kind of country. And by the way, I mean, I would be careful about underestimating this. I mean, the Russians were able to build lots of tanks and machines to defeat Hitler. They built up large numbers of things during the Cold War. They pioneered space. They're certainly not a backward country in that respect, but they had a different economic system from China, and their geographical location is different from China. And of course, they weren't interested, and they're still to a great extent not interested in trading to the outside world, because self-sufficiency can sometimes drive you inwards. You don't need to go out and trade with the outside world as China does, because you don't have to. But, look at the history, look at the demography, look at many things. That's a complicated question, and it's not one that has simple answers.
And Russia's a very new country. When you when you get down to it, you're looking at a democracy that's 20, 25 years old at that.
That is also very true, actually. I mean, you must never make comparisons. An economic reform started in from a very different place.
Very difficult place.
Very difficult place, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's a sort of question that in 20 years' time we might be answering in a different way from today. So let's
I will say this. When you look at Putin and what he has done, when you look at the 90s, you look at what Russia came out of in 89, 90, 91, and you look at Putin and when he came on the scene, I think it is absolutely safe to say that hands down, he has been perhaps the most impactful and the greatest leader we have seen in our generation. I mean, he has lifted Russia out of certain it was about to break apart.
Absolutely. I mean,
it was about to break apart, and he's led it skillfully for the last 20 years in a way that I think no one ever expected.
No, absolutely. And can I just say, I mean, you have to have seen what it was like to understand that, and you've also have to have witnessed how things changed in Russia during Putin's time. I mean, that change didn't happen all at once. It's been incremental. It still is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. From let's see where we are. From Toilet Sauce, 50 euro super chat. Thank you, Toilet Sauce, for that. The chairman of the OSCE. Oh, good question. This chairman of the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission told the UNSC Security Council yesterday that the OSCE has not received any reports from observers about the presence of Russian troops in Donbass. 7 years of propaganda about Russian occupation down the toilet. And that goes with the user handle Toilet Sauce. 7 years of propaganda about Russian occupation down the toilet. Once again, Alexander, the theme of clown world versus real world, fantasy versus reality.
Yes, and notice by the way that again, the media, the mainstream media, of course, doesn't report that story. On the contrary, we're going to hear the same propaganda repeated again, despite the fact that the chairman of the OSCE, who is someone who should know because he's observers there on the ground, says otherwise.
Yeah. Thank you for that super chat. Good point there. We should do probably a show on that as well, because no one is reporting on this. From Ruby's 200, is Italy beginning to dominate the Mediterranean?
Oh, I wouldn't say. I mean, if I have to say which country dominates the Mediterranean, it's one country, and it's the United States. I mean, the US presence, if you're talking about military presence in the Mediterranean, is absolutely overwhelming. I mean, they've got bases all around it. They've got Sixth Fleet there. They are in a hugely dominant position, militarily speaking. If you're talking economically, well, all the countries of the Mediterranean are in a mess economically at one level or another. So again, you can't really speak of Italy, which has grave problems dominating the Mediterranean in that kind of way.
All right. From Amit Nimiyar, 100, is Italy carving a region of total domination in the Mediterranean and Balkans through its big economy? I have a question about Italy.
Well, again, I don't see it. I mean, Italy is an important country. It's a country, by the way, which consistently punches below its weight. because its political system has been dysfunctional for pretty much all my lifetime, and it's got a weak financial sector, even though it's got strong industries, well, potentially strong industries, tremendous design, tradition, and also very, very strong companies. I mean, some Italian companies. Well, we all know these extraordinary brands that Italy has, and that's real. So Italy ought to be a much bigger force, both in Europe and in the Mediterranean, than it is. And no doubt there is a certain amount of influence in the Balkans, in places like Libya, places like Ethiopia, by the way. I mean, you'd be surprised. I mean, I've never been to Ethiopia, but people who have tell me that, Italian influence is quite strong there. You see Italian businesses have a sort of inbuilt advantage there. So Italy does play a role. It could play an even bigger role, but domination at the moment, I really don't see.
All right, from Anatoly, 449 rubles. Thank you both for your comments. Looking forward to your video on big tech. Shane Peter doesn't join you anymore. Thank you very much, Anatoly. We will get a video of that out on big tech. From the chat, a €5 super chat. Isn't Boris Johnson related to Kamal? I've heard that. I don't know if it's true. I've heard that.
I'm afraid with Boris, you have to take every story about him with a gigantic mountain of salt, because all kinds of things are said about him that one mustn't assume necessarily to be true. What I will say is this: apparently he does have a Turkish connection in his family, but what it is exactly, I'm not sure I know. So I'm not going to try and guess.
All right. Thank you very much for that super chat, Lechat. Peace Jed says, thanks for the up-to-date news. €5 super chat. Thank you very much. Peace Jed for that. ST814, 1999 super chat, super sticker. Thanks for being you. Thank you very much for that super sticker, ST814. From Dimitri, $10 super chat. Greece cannot likely defend Cyprus Castellorizo without EU help. If the EU, France, are going through debt lockdown crisis, then doesn't Erdogan know this and is just waiting for the right time to strike?
Well, I hope that he doesn't think that, because I think if he does, we would have a major crisis in our hands. But ultimately, Greece obviously is a member of the EU. Obviously, it needs to maintain, cultivate some relations with the EU. Germany is a broken reed in this thing. France is a real force. It's got a powerful military. It could help Greece in this kind of situation. But the two great powers, military powers, with the greatest influence on Turkey at the moment, overwhelmingly, are the United States and Russia. Principally the United States, because Turkey's a member of NATO, and in the Mediterranean, as we've discussed, it is the United States which is overwhelmingly dominant, but Russia has levers it can pull also. And Greece has historically neglected those two powers. Mitsotakis, to his credit, has parted company with the Tsipras policy. Mitsotakis has worked more with the Americans, but he's very neglected his options with Russia. And will Erdogan use his opportunities to strike the things that we see at the moment? I'm afraid we can never be sure, but I don't think that's what he's thinking at the moment. At the moment, I think he's trying, to the extent that he can, to mend his fences with the US.
Yeah. All right. From Jade Reef, do you know what is actually happening in other countries? Heard most leaders are being taken down and massive military force in almost all countries.
Well, I think
we talked about this in the opening segment a bit too, with a lot of the protests going down everywhere as well.
Absolutely. I mean, this is, and it's been interesting to see actually how this has accelerated, intensified over the last few months. Now, some of these protests, at least those in Europe, one can say that they're not sort of, controlled by someone in Washington. I mean, the protests in Denmark, in the Netherlands, in those countries are, I think, real grassroots protests. But protests in other places, well, I'm not so sure. I mean, I read a piece about protests in Myanmar, And there was some comment about how quickly those protests were organized directly after the coup, and how the people there seemed to be prepared for those kind of protests and how they'd been primed. Other protests, I have to say, look completely artificial. And I have to say, I'm sorry to say this, but the protests that happened in Russia after Navalny's arrests certainly look like that to me.
Yeah. What do you make of the fact that you have countries like Netherlands, Norway, Denmark having protests? And you also, and I would assume that Rutte is going to win. The election. I mean, what does that tell you, though?
Because
it doesn't line up.
Exactly, because there is no one else. You see, the Netherlands, like Germany, like all these other countries. I mean, the political system has now become. I mean, somebody says, it's become like a kind of blob. You get somebody who says that they're opposed, and then they become assimilated into the system, which just goes on reproducing itself, so that people start losing confidence that they can change things through the ballot. And unsurprisingly, when that happens, they start to protest. Now, countries like the Netherlands, Denmark, incredibly stable, law-abiding, orderly countries. The fact that people have been pushed into protesting shows, firstly, how difficult things are, and they are very difficult, extremely difficult in these countries. But secondly, how little they believe that anything is going to change through the normal operations of the political system, and that is a very, very worrying thing.
Yeah. All right, Anne, glad you got the mug. Our mugs are great. A real quick plug before we do the last super chat. This is of Mexico. We actually have Colombia and Venezuela on the store going up soon as well. So we're adding more and more countries to our shop.
Indeed, mine, by the way, is one of Dimitris's mugs, which,
okay.
but we have our amazing magic mugs, which you will find with many flags, and obviously you have them on our shirts too. You can see this is the flag of Scotland, by the way. I can't do much on my mind because Craig Murray, who's someone I know, by the way, know very well, is going through a difficult legal process there.
We have one more super chat, Alexander, but I'll ask you about Scotland because I wanted to ask you about Scotland. What is going on with Scotland? Are they going to have another vote? What's the deal there? I don't understand. And real quick, I don't understand. Is Nicola Sturgeon, is she popular or not?
Well, this is a very good question. Very, very good question, because, of course, what is happening is that there has been an upswing in favour of Scottish independence. I mean, the opinion polls are now steadily showing most Scots now want independence from the UK, which, by the way, if it happens, would be a gigantic and huge event. But at the same time as that is happening, there is a major crisis within the Scottish Nationalist Party ahead of new legislative elections, which are due to happen in Scotland in May. And this is all about claims that have been made by the former leader, Alex Salmond, who, in my opinion, is the most talented politician in Scotland, that his successor, Nicola Sturgeon, orchestrated this plot against him to try and bring Salmond down by making various allegations of sexual misconduct against him, which led to a trial. So you have a split in the SNP, the Scottish Nationalist Party, happening at the same time that most Scots are drifting into a position or are choosing to back independence. And this is creating a very volatile atmosphere because it's very uncertain how this is going to play out, whether Nicola Sturgeon will hold on to the leadership of the SNP and will remain First Minister, or whether there will be a rebellion against her within the SNP, and possibly, if some of these allegations are true, even conceivably legal action. And at the same time, whether that would lead to a takeover by Salmond or by somebody connected to Salmond, and how that would play out. So it's a very confusing situation in Scotland. Craig Murray, whom, as I said, I know, has got caught up in all of this and has recently been tried on contempt of court charges in the High Court in Edinburgh, and he's a member of the SNP, and he's obviously anti-Sturgeon and pro-Salmond. So we will see. Now, if Salmond becomes leader and the SNP wins the elections in Scotland, and I think Salmond is ultimately a more popular figure in Scotland than Sturgeon is, though I know there will be many people who will say otherwise. But if Salmond wins and becomes leader, he's an abrasive, charismatic figure. I think he will push for a referendum as quickly as possible, and he will tell Boris, if you don't hold a referendum, I will call it myself, even if that formally breaks British law, and if it goes for independence, I will declare myself the leader of an independent Scotland and invite other countries to recognise me. I think that is how that would play out. If Sturgeon remains leader of the SNP and the SNP wins in the elections in May, which everybody, by the way, expects that it will win the elections in May, then I think she will take a much more conciliatory line and she will try to negotiate some kind of deal with Boris Johnson, which could mean a referendum being put off or being held on somewhat more modified terms. And we might even see, conceivably, some kind of arrangement keeping Scotland and Britain, or England rather, together in some way. So lots to talk about, lots to speak about, but a very volatile situation, which nobody really knows how it's going to work through.
All right. Let's see. We have some more super chats that came in, so we'll wrap it up with these super chats. Let's see. From Sparky, I read somewhere that Indian South Asian food still shows ancient Greek influence because of Alexander the Great. Very true. Very true observation.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Sparky, for that super chat. From Moonswan Silverlight, £5 super chat. My dad asked me where I got my 2 bugs from. LOL, I'm planning on getting another shirt at some point. Love the Duran store, lads. Thank you very much, Moonswan Silverlight, for that. The Duran shop, you'll find the link underneath this video. And from Sparky, robber barons and Five Eyes run most of the world.
Very true.
Very true.
Very, very true. Very sad, but also very true. And this program was all about unreality versus reality. That's the reality.
Yep, and their power is getting more and more with each day. From Dimitri, $10 super chat, and this is, I think we got all of the super chats here. From Dimitri, why do you think Erdogan cares if he will have a crisis on his or your hands? Turkey got away with it in Cyprus in 74 and digested them a few years of sanctions when the U.S. then had more control over Turkey.
That's entirely true. I mean, that's an entirely valid and real point. And, I don't assume anything where Erdogan is concerned. I mean, trying to work out his next moves is difficult. And he's somebody who makes calculations, and at the same time, he's somebody who can act on impulse. He's a difficult person to read. As I said previously, I don't discount the possibility of a conflict at all. All I am saying is that at the moment, my sense is that his priority is to try to come to some kind of deal at the moment with Biden and the Americans. If he can't get it, then, well, he could move in any direction. He could focus towards Syria. He could focus more again towards the Caucasus. He could move towards Iraq, or he could move against Cyprus and Greece. But we will see.
All right. Okay, guys, we'll leave it there. Great stream. We had a lot to catch up on and a lot to cover. Spartan Warrior Queen, thank you very, very much for everything that you do. Let's give a big shout out to Spartan Warrior Queen. What would we do without Spartan Warrior Queen?
Well, indeed. We are hugely grateful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone for joining us. Thank you to everyone that sent us super chats and everyone that has also sent us stuff via PayPal or via our own donor box platform or Patreon, Subscribestar, people that have gone to the Duran shop and picked up merchandise, and everyone that likes our channel and comments on our channel. Thank you very, very much. We got a super chat from Toilet Sauce, and we will wrap it up here. Is the Bilderberg Group the Politburo of the globalists? Good way to end the show, Toilet Sauce. Are they the Politburo of the globalists, Alexander?
Well, I wouldn't know. I would have thought that there is a Politburo. I'm not sure who they are exactly, but I wouldn't be surprised if some of them.
Klaus Schwab,
maybe. Schwab, maybe, definitely, I'd say. But he's the World Economic Forum, I think, which is a somewhat different entity.
What sister entities?
Sister entities. We did a very good video. At least I thought it was a very interesting video about Putin and his speech at Davos, where he was actually addressing.
No one reported on. It didn't make the news. We reported on it, and it was huge because it was very much the same type of moment. And when Putin was at the Security Council and he made that famous line when everything was going down, I believe it was Libya or Syria, where Putin said, "What have you done?"
Exactly.
He was kind of talking to Obama and the West, and he says, "What have you done?" It was very much along those lines, directed at Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, where Putin pretty much said, "You guys with the Great Reset are out of your freaking minds."
Absolutely. It was a brilliant speech, actually, extraordinary speech. Gradually, you're beginning to notice that people are talking about it more, but it's taken a long time because, again, the media didn't cover it. The Financial Times, for example, which covers everybody's speeches at Davos, ignored Putin's completely.
They didn't want to cover it. Too much truth in one speech for them to handle.
All right. What was it Orwell said? That in a time of tyranny, telling the truth is a revolutionary act.
Yeah, very true. Let's see. Rich sent the super chat here. Italy and Greece can be great partners against Turks.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have been in the past. I mean, if you go to Corfu, which is of course an island where my mother was born, it was part of the Republic of Venice. And as a result, it never became part of the Ottoman Empire. It kept the Turks at bay.
Yeah, a lot of love in Greece for Italy.
Yes,
I can guarantee you a lot of love.
Yes, indeed so. And in fact, I mean, we're very different, very distinct cultures, but very compatible ones. Greeks and Italians get on extremely well, and our cultures actually have a lot of points of contact.
All right. We will leave it there. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Have a great Friday. Have a great weekend. And keep your eyes out for another live stream. And we'll have a lot of good surprises in that live stream. All right, Alexander, any final words before we sign off?
What a joy to be back on a live stream. I've missed it, and we'll be doing many more. We had some technical issues. They're all resolved, and we're looking forward to the next one.
All right. Take care, everybody.